Days had passed since Rasmus learned the truth behind the great era from Isidore. With his day off finally here, he decided to pay Chancellor Lenin a visit. Vidal tagged along, mostly out of boredom, having grown restless at the academy and frequently voicing his complaints over every little thing. Just as Rasmus raised his hand to knock on Lenin's office door, it swung open, revealing Julian. Her expression instantly soured the moment she saw him. She didn't offer a greeting, only a cold glare. "Do you have business with the Chancellor, Instructor?" she asked, voice like frost. "Am I not allowed to speak with the Chancellor now?" Rasmus replied, locking eyes with her. "That hardly concerns you, Vice-Chancellor." Julian scowled but didn't argue further. She brushed past him without another word. Vidal, standing behind, chuckled under his breath. "She's got a real attitude. Maybe she just needs something hard to satisfy her," he muttered with a mischievous grin. Rasmus said nothing, choosing instead to knock. A moment later, Lenin's voice called out, permitting him to enter. "For what reason do you want to see me, Instructor Blackheart?" Lenin asked, setting aside the document she'd been reviewing. "Am I allowed to visit the magic tower? Or is it restricted?" Rasmus asked as he tapped the notebook in his left palm. "It is restricted. The tower is reserved for scholars and mages only." "But I can grant you a permit," Lenin replied, folding her arms. Her gaze narrowed. "Why do you want to go there?" "You told me once that I could find more about my mother's origins there," Rasmus said, slipping the notebook into his coat pocket. "But that's not the only reason. I heard the tower has a spatial experimentation chamber. I'd like to test something, privately." Lenin leaned forward, intrigued. She laced her fingers in front of her face. "I'll allow it, but only on one condition. I want to be there when you do." Rasmus hesitated. He didn't want Lenin getting too close to his secrets. Her curiosity could complicate his plans to spread chaos in Neva. But the offer was also an opportunity to gauge her interest, to reveal just enough. Asterisk, better to have her watching than working against me outright. Asterisk, he thought. "I don't mind," he agreed with a nod. "Then let's not waste time. We'll take the blimp." "I don't have the patience for carriages today," Lenin said, summoning her robe from a hanger with a flick of magic. Outside, staff and students turned to stare as Rasmus passed by. The story of his survival, the 10 years of hardship, had become a legend on campus. But some still viewed him through the lens of his family name, Blackheart. He glanced toward the training grounds. His students were hard at work, just as he'd asked. "They're working well together now," Lenin noted, watching them. Who would have thought they'd train side by side without a second thought to their backgrounds? "I just did what I thought was right," Rasmus replied, brushing off the compliment. Lenin chuckled softly. She found Rasmus's mix of humility and pride curious, if not a bit endearing. The trio boarded the blimp and flew south toward the city of scholars. It took 2 hours to reach the towering silhouette of the magic tower. "Everyone here's ancient," Vidal commented bluntly. "They're scholars and high mages, people who've dedicated their lives to magic," Lenin replied. "But there are young prodigies too. You might meet them inside." "How young?" Rasmus asked, watching robed figures hustle between buildings, arms full of scrolls. "Your age. Geniuses of this era. You might have been one too, if life had been kinder," she said with a soft sigh. The magic tower came into full view, a spiraling monument of violet and deep blue stone, 20 times wider and 10 times taller than the Tower of Pisa. It soared over a kilometer into the clouds, its peak vanishing from sight. "Welcome to the magic tower," Lenin said, gesturing to the massive entrance. Inside, it was cavernous, more like a stadium than a tower. Rasmus stood in awe as scholars in grey robes and archmages surrounded by floating books filled the space. "Let's head to the 100th floor. The testing chambers are there," Lenin said, leading them to a massive magic circle at the center. She activated it, and the floor rose like a giant, glowing elevator. Rasmus watched his eyes turn toward them, curious, envious. Lenin noticed his glance. "Only a few are permitted to use the circle. It's rare, and they know it," she explained. When they arrived at the 100th floor, the door in front of them led into a sealed chamber. As Rasmus stepped inside, he instantly felt suffocated. A blinding pillar of light dominated the room, pressing down on him with unbearable pressure. "We can't stay here long." "The spatial space lies through the light," Lenin said, walking toward it. The entire chamber pulsed with concentrated mana, and Rasmus felt his skin crawl. The pressure was unlike anything he had ever experienced, an invisible force trying to crush him. As he followed Lenin into the light, nausea overwhelmed him. He staggered and vomited, gasping for breath. That's normal, Lennon said gently. Everyone reacts that way the first time. She turned to Vidal and paused. But your butler seems completely unaffected. Vidal met her gaze in silence, then offered her a quiet, unreadable smile. Rasmus took his time recovering, the aftereffects of the intense mana field still lingering in his body. The spatial space around him stretched endlessly, an expanse of whiteness that felt like drifting inside a boundless cloud. Meanwhile, Lennon conversed with the resident sages, who were deeply immersed in their magical experiments. Vidal stood nearby, arms crossed, watching Lennon with narrowed eyes. I let my guard down, he said, almost to himself. She's suspicious now. That might cause you trouble down the line. Sorry. Rasmus, still rubbing the bridge of his nose, shook his head. It's fine. If anything, it gives them a reason to believe why I'm so gifted. He exhaled, stood up, and added, We'll come up with a backstory for you later. Vidal gave a small hum and straightened, stepping back into his role as a butler. He offered a handkerchief and wiped a faint stain of vomit from Rasmus's suit with quiet efficiency. Lennon turned from the sages and called out, Feeling better, Instructor Blackheart? Rasmus nodded. I'm fine, Chancellor. May I use this space now? I'll need a wide area for the experiment I have in mind. How wide? She asked, folding her arms. Rasmus looked around at the endless glowing void. How large is this spatial space? As large as Gratlin, and it continues to grow, Lennon replied. The dragon veins below fuel it with infinite mana. The same mana that keeps this island floating 8,000 meters above ground. Perfect, Rasmus said with a small smirk, already striding farther from the others. The spatial mana welcomed him, fluid, abundant, waiting to be shaped. Rasmus closed his eyes, reaching into memory. The blueprint wasn't magical, but scientific, an echo from a world long lost. Earth. He remembered the atomic bomb, the destructive brilliance of the chain reaction that once altered history. Asterisk, first, a container. Something that can hold a critical mass of particles. Asterisk. He focused, shaping a sphere of mana between his hands, the size of a basketball. Lennon observed, intrigued by the density and stability of the structure. Then came the smaller mana cores, hundreds of them, like seeds, compressed and tightly packed within the larger sphere. Her instinct screamed to stop him. But curiosity tethered her in place. Then, the mana seeds began to vibrate, react, destabilize. Asterisk, friction. Instability. Then fusion, until we hit the critical point. Asterisk. Lennon's eyes widened in disbelief. No chance. No magic circles. Just pure, raw control. She opened her mouth to interrupt, but Vidal calmly stepped in front of her, silently shaking his head. Rasmus opened his eyes, fused the sphere with wind magic, and hurled it into the void. Far away, the wind turned to flame. And the explosion came. A blinding flash followed by a thunderous shockwave, mushroom-shaped, towering, unstoppable. But it wasn't nuclear. It was worse. The detonation didn't scorch, it drained. The blast radiated a wave of negative mana, stripping everyone of their strength and casting them into a mana-depleted paralysis. Rasmus stood unaffected within a bubble of protective mana, a self-made hazmat suit of magic. He watched the result of his work unfold like a scientist observing a successful test. Lennon, struck by the shockwave, dropped to one knee, her ears ringing, her vision blurring. The sages behind her collapsed outright. For 1 minute, she felt truly powerless. And when she tried to gather mana, it was gone. She looked up and saw Rasmus and Vidal, standing tall within their barriers. She tried to speak, but the ringing in her ears drowned all sound. Her limbs felt heavy, and black spots danced in her vision. Rasmus approached and reached out, placing a hand gently on hers. He channeled mana into her body to restore her, but she coughed violently, rejecting the influx. Her body couldn't hold it. Blood stained her lips. He's not even a sage, and yet. Lennon's thoughts unraveled in disbelief as darkness closed in around her. Asterisk, no formation. No catalysts. Just raw knowledge. He's too dangerous. Too unnatural, asterisk. Then, she fainted. Rasmus quietly lifted her into his arms, his expression unreadable. They measure magic by how much mana they can output, he murmured, watching her unconscious form. They never considered what happens when you change how mana works. Vidal walked beside him, his eyes still on the fading mushroom cloud. That was terrifying, he said. But let's be real, you can't make that outside this space. The mana requirements alone. I'm working on it, Rasmus replied. And this demonstration was enough. I won't show her anything else. Vidal raised an eyebrow. So, what are the other fun experiments? Hydrogen bomb. And right now, I'm trying to create an antimatter bomb. Vidal let out a low whistle. If you pull that off, you could destroy the world in a night. I could, Rasmus agreed, but outside this space, it's not feasible, yet. However, he looked around thoughtful. This space's self-sustaining expansion. It gave me an idea. I think I've figured out what's missing from my antimatter theory. He didn't say more, but the glint in his eyes said enough. Vidal gave a dry laugh. Are you trying to take over my role now? I'm supposed to be the devil, and right now you're more evil than me. Rasmus smiled faintly. Isn't that what being human means? A saint one day, a devil the next.
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
Rasmus yawned as he looked at the beautiful Gratland from the 120th floor of the Magic Tower. He enjoyed the view and he could see everything from there except the academy because it was blocked by the massive council's place. He looked at his wristwatch and noticed it had been 4 hours since he had brought Lennon to the infirmary. The sages and the high priests had been trying so hard to deal with her mana depletion. Excuse me, Count Blackheart. Great Sage Lennon is waiting for you inside. A sage looked at Rasmus with a cold expression, hiding her disgust toward him as a Blackheart. Rasmus nodded and went into the infirmary with Vidal. Lennon was sitting on the bed, staring at the cloud right outside the window. She was being treated by a woman who was too young to be in the magic tower. The woman had short dark blue hair and blue eyes. You're looking fine like nothing happened, Chancellor, Rasmus said as he approached Lennon. The woman glanced at Rasmus and her eyes never left his as if she was checking on him. She then furrowed her eyebrows as if she was disturbed by something, but Rasmus didn't bother about it. That spell that you released, what was that? Lennon looked at Rasmus with a confused look. It's something that I have developed. It has been inside my head since I was young. It was something that my late father invented. I could control such a complicated mana. I was blessed by that, Rasmus lied without hesitation as he looked at the cloud outside the window. I had to train for years to pull this out and because of my amazing butler, of course. Your training must have something to do with mana control, correct? May I see how good you are at controlling mana? Lennon looked intrigued by Rasmus's story. Rasmus lifted his left hand and pointed his index and middle fingers upward. In Lennon's eyes, Rasmus absorbed a dense amount of mana on those fingers. When he swung his fingers toward the curtain was cut cleanly. That's pure mana. The woman said as she stared at Rasmus's fingers. Your control over mana is outstanding. I don't believe not all wizards have amazing control over mana as you do, she added and was awed by Rasmus's control over mana. Lennon nodded in agreement as she observed the dense amount of mana on Rasmus's 2 fingers. She was amazed that he could shape it like a knife blade and make mana sharp on the edges. No wonder you can contain mana and control a lot of them like back there. Lennon was amazed and in awe just like the woman. How did you train to do that? She looked at Rasmus with her eyes squinted. Rasmus removed his wristwatch and showed it to Lennon, with this. Lennon looked at the wristwatch, which was something that she had never seen before. Her reaction was similar to Garrett and the others. She took the wristwatch from Rasmus's hand and admired the craftsmanship of the watch. She could see the small needles, the numbers, and the thin stripes on the watch. You created a miniature of a clock like this which required extreme precision to achieve this. Lennon looked at the watch from up close. But, why is it not working? She furrowed as she looked at the back of the wristwatch. I used mana to run the watch. This makes me capable of controlling mana unconsciously. If my watch isn't matched with the real time, that means I failed, but so far, that hadn't happened for the past few months, Rasmus explained. Lennon and the woman stared at each other. They realized it was perfect training for everyone, even for sages. Can we use this method? Lennon asked as she gave back the wristwatch. And what can I get from this? Rasmus asked back and wore the wristwatch on his left wrist. This watch that you made, you will get the patent for this no matter what kind of model they're making. We will give you a minimum 50% royalty. Not only that, you will get a patent for this training method, and they have to pay to use this method, Lennon answered. With that being said, the Magic Tower will rent your training method for 10,000 eclairs. How's that? She asked. Rasmus didn't expect that Lennon would offer something more than what Ruben offered. He thought about it for a moment and he had no choice but to explain to Lennon about the deal he had made with Ruben. Lennon didn't expect that Ruben had already made contact with Rasmus, but she wasn't surprised since it was a good invention. She knew Reuben well, and she decided to talk about this matter with Reuben for a partnership. Still, the Magic Tower will still offer you 10,000 eclairs for renting this training method. Do you accept it? Lennon asked as she gave the wristwatch back to Rasmus. Of course, great sage. It's an easy money, Rasmus nodded. There's something else that I want from this deal. It's not something fancy. I want to learn how to create my own magic formations, just like those sages inside that spatial space. I want to learn how to create runes, he added. That's not going to happen, Lennon responded without hesitation. There are risks with this knowledge, and I can't trust you with this knowledge, Count Blackheart. You need to achieve greatness and contribute something to the world. Then, we will decide if you're worthy of learning that or not, she added with a serious expression. That's worth the shot. Rasmus gave the page to Lennon. Lennon looked at how the wristwatch was made, the blueprint for it. She was stunned when she saw how complicated it was to make a wristwatch. She had just realized that the inside of the wristwatch was more complicated and required more precision than what it looked like from the outside. This is. Lennon was speechless. You came up with this. She looked at Rasmus in disbelief that he could create such a complicated item with extreme precision as well. Yes. I spent my time learning about everything, great sage. It's not that hard to believe, especially since I only copied how a real clock works, Rasmus answered as he looked at the blueprint in Lennon's hand. Ah, I almost forgot. She's my disciple, the one and only Novia. She's a year younger than you, but she's already a high wizard and she will rank up to sage soon. Lennon pointed her left hand at the woman next to her. Rasmus and Novia nodded at each other as they introduced themselves. Novia didn't come from a noble family, she was just a commoner, an orphan. Rasmus didn't pry on it because he didn't have any business with her, or at least not yet. Since I'm bedridden, Novia will escort you to the Magic Tower Library. There's a book that allows you to understand magic formation. You can learn the basics from it and then I'll teach you once I have recovered, Lennon said as she made herself comfortable on the bed. She will also give you the book that you need, she added with a serious expression. Rasmus nodded with understanding. If you may, Instructor Blackheart. Novia looked at Rasmus and pointed her hand at the door. Ladies first, Rasmus smiled. Novia escorted Rasmus to the 50th floor where the library was. The library was massive because they used the whole floor as the library, which was as big as a football stadium. There weren't enough paths to walk on. There were so many books stacked on the floor because the bookshelves were full already. This is the book about magic formation, Novia showed a red book in her hands. This book is supposed to be for advanced people who are profound in magic. But I believe you can understand it, she pointed out. Rasmus took the book and glanced through the pages to see what kind of book he was going to read. He could see drawings and the explanation of each line and curve in a magic formation. This book should be forbidden to leave the library, but the Chancellor allowed you to bring it outside. You need to return it once you're done reading it, Novia said as she stared at the book. There's no need, Rasmus closed the book. I'll read the book here because I wouldn't waste my opportunity to get my hands on these books. He looked at the library, overwhelmed by books. Novia nodded with understanding, and then she pulled out a book from thin air which surprised Rasmus. He heard from Henry there was spatial storage that the Magic Tower had invented, and it was the first time he saw it with his own eyes. This book is the one that you're looking for, Novia put the black book in front of Rasmus. Please make sure nobody reads this except you, she warned and glanced at Videl. I understand, Rasmus said and then glanced at Videl, signaling him to leave him alone. Videl nodded and wandered around the library to waste time. Novia on the other hand excused herself and left the library to give Rasmus some privacy. Magic formation can act as a fail-safe method or as a preset like magic scrolls. Rasmus muttered as he read the book. The question would be, how could I make a magic formation that only I can understand? He crossed his legs as he leaned back against the backrest. Runes. I need to learn how to read and understand them, he pointed out as he looked at the combination of runes in a single magic formation. He wanted to focus on one thing at a time but couldn't stop glancing at the black book beside him. The book would answer all his questions about his late mother and the Orpheus race. Magic formation can wait. Rasmus put down the red book and grabbed the black book. The book looked old and the cover's edges had decayed with time, barely hanging on to the rest of the book. He carefully opened the book and the first thing he read was the name of the author who made the book. An End of a Saga by E.B. Those must be initials of the author's name, Rasmus muttered to himself. He flipped to the first page and it began with a gruesome illustration, a drawing of countless bodies in a pit with hundreds of people circling it. In that drawing, some figures were different from the rest where they wore crowns and held scepters. Those who defy our gods are evil. Rasmus looked at the quotes below the drawing. That message was simple, but because of the drawing, he felt a little bit disturbed. He read the second page and the author began the paragraph with a simple yet deep question: why? The author began to explain what happened in the drawing and who the people were. Ortheas, an ancient race that had roamed this world long before humans, thousands of years before humans existed. They called themselves the protectors of this world and found humans as pests. They had observed many living beings that came to Neva before humans, and they had erased them all from existence because of their tendency to destroy the world. Many speculated that Ortheas had roamed Neva alongside dragons, celestial creatures that shaped the world with their powers. Dragons had long gone, leaving remnants of their existence, wyverns, and other creatures that resembled them. The author stated that humans weren't born but rather came down to this world. It wasn't the author's words but rather an Ortheas that they befriended who told them. A mysterious pair of humans came down and Ortheas took care of them and taught them how to survive. Hundreds of years had passed since the first two humans came and the Ortheas had been observing them ever since. Humans grew rapidly, and for Ortheas the growth of humans was similar to animals in their eyes, fast and uncontrollable. They watched as humans began to destroy nature for their own benefit, conflict among themselves, and kill each other. Ortheas believed that humans were animals, savages that couldn't control their desires. They could erase humankind just like they did to the previous beings that came to Neva, but they didn't. The only reason they didn't do it was because not all humans were savages, their intelligence, and lastly their ability to control mana, just like them. As humankind grew rapidly, inventions were made and they began to question the world of who they were and why they existed. They asked Ortheas about themselves and how they existed. The Ortheas didn't know the answer because they never thought about it. One day the first saint was born to Neva with her ability to heal the wounded, speak to the dead, bring the dead to life, and finally hear a voice. Gods were introduced by the saints, providing guidance, miracles, and blessings to those who followed. Ortheas thought that humankind was no longer animals because of religion, but they were wrong. Eventually, more and more saints were born, introducing different gods. Conflicts arose, and humans began to kill each other because of their beliefs. They used religions as excuses to kill each other, and greed never left their nature. Kings were born, nations were made, and death was everywhere. It was too late for Ortheas to eliminate humankind because humans outmatched their numbers. The moment they killed a few humans was when the saints categorized the Ortheas as heathens. The magic that they taught was used against them, killing them one by one. They were hunted, killed, and things that were worse than death. Thousands of Ortheas were killed, collected by the believers, and placed inside a massive pit. They called that pit Heathen's Grave, where they burned and bodies of Ortheas. It was stated that the fire lasted for months because the bodies could endure the flames way longer than human bodies. It's believed there were a few hundred Ortheas left, and they had never been seen ever since. Rasmus muttered as he read the last paragraph. He took a deep breath as he looked out the window, staring at the clouds blankly. He finally found out the origin of his late mother, Aristoria Blackheart. An ancient race. Rasmus muttered as he rubbed his chin. But how did she end up with my father? He furrowed his brows and thought about it thoroughly. He was so deep in the thought that he didn't notice Lenin was walking toward him. Lenin could see the book he was holding and she could see the conflict in his expression. What kind of thought do you have in there, Count Blackheart, to make such an expression? Lenin asked as she sat beside Rasmus and looked into his eyes. Rasmus snapped back to reality and looked at Lenin, who seemed to have recovered. He adjusted his sitting position and sat straight as he put down the book. Have you wondered how my late father ended up with an Ortheas? We both know that Ortheas has grudges and hatred toward humans, so how did they both end up together and have a child? Rasmus asked, his eyes focused on the spot on the table. Lenin grabbed the book and the book disappeared into thin air. She then created invisible vacuum walls around them to prevent everyone from eavesdropping. The whole world has the same question as yours, Count. It has been 1,000 years since the last time we saw an Ortheas, so how did your late father meet your late mother? It's a mystery that we will never know, Lenin answered as she looked at the ring on her middle finger. But I know that they both loved each other, she pointed out, her eyes blank and brows raised. Rasmus didn't say a word and began tapping his finger on the table. His eyes roamed the bookshelves with thousands of books around him. It's because their desires are aligned. Rasmus pointed out and glanced at Lenin. They wouldn't be together if they didn't have something in common. Lenin nodded in agreement, yes. One wanted to destroy humankind and the other wanted to take down the royal family. She crossed her arms and thought about it for a moment. How could someone like Erglade suddenly raise his banner and kill the royal family? Dissatisfaction wasn't the case, Rasmus answered as he crossed his arms. The most convincing reasons would be betrayal or that he found out something that he shouldn't have about the royal family. Maybe it was both, he pointed out and glanced at Lennon, wanting to see her reaction. Lennon slowly shifted her body toward Rasmus and stared right into his eyes. She was in disbelief at how sharp Rasmus could be for someone his age, not to mention that he had never learned anything about politics because he had been exiled and abandoned when he was young. That's what I thought as well, Lennon responded as she leaned her body forward. What do you think that is, Count? She narrowed her eyes and crossed her arms. Rasmus thought for a moment about whether he should do this or not. He decided to risk it and hoped it worked against her. The same reason why the Great Era happened 400 years ago. My late father might have found the same evil thing that the royal family hid from the rest of the world, Rasmus answered with a serious expression. Lennon's expression changed into a serious one. She slowly pulled herself away and sat straight, but her eyes never left Rasmus's eyes. You knew? Lennon asked, her voice soft and yet cold. I knew, Rasmus nodded. Then there's something I have to tell you, Count, Lennon said as she took a deep breath. The day before your whole family got executed, I visited your late father in secrecy and he told me everything, she revealed. This time, Rasmus was the one who was taken aback by the revelation. Tell me, Rasmus said coldly. A mysterious person wearing a black cloak and a hoodie that covered their faces stood in front of a steel gate. There were dozens of knights lying on the ground unconscious. The mysterious person grabbed the key to the gate and opened it slowly and quietly. The sound of the boots echoed in the dark dungeon without a single light. The figure could walk in the dark without any problem. The figure stopped their steps and slowly looked to the left where the cell was. Count Blackheart, the figure spoke, it was a woman's voice. This voice. The man's voice was weak and shaky. The figure created a fireball to light the cell and reveal her identity. The moment the woman pulled down her hood, she revealed her face, the great sage of Neva, Lennon Sliver. She looked at Erglade's condition and she couldn't believe what she was seeing. They did this to you, Count? Lennon looked at Erglade was chained to the wall, his arms were gone. The bandages couldn't absorb all the blood on his shoulders. She could see the blood was dripping to the cold stone floor, and Erglade was standing on his own pool of blood. There's no other way for them to feel safe, is there? Erglade smiled weakly, his eyes barely open, fighting the hallucination from the blood loss. Funny enough that they still fear me even in this state, he chuckled weakly. Of course they are. I'm the only one who can beat you into a pulp, Lennon smiled softly. Erglade smiled weakly as he closed his eyes for a moment. I still don't want to be your apprentice, great sage, if that's the reason for your visit, he muttered. Still arrogant even in this state, are you? Are all Blackheart like this? Lennon laughed quietly as she shook her head. There was only silence after that. It wasn't an awkward silence, it was something else. Why did you do this, Count? Raised your banner and killed the royal family. Lennon asked as she crossed her arms, staring into Erglade's eyes. Erglade rested his head against the wall behind him to fight the headache and the sleepiness that had been trying to conquer his body. The pain was unbearable, but somehow he didn't show any reaction to it. The world is in danger, great sage. The world has become so peaceful that evil doesn't need to lurk in the shadows anymore. They have been walking among us leisurely. I had to do it, I had to put them back to their place, Erglade answered weakly, his eyes almost all white. What evil, Erglade? Lennon began to address him using his first name, a sign of trust and closeness. Find my journal, you'll find all the answers you need, Erglade answered. His neck could no longer support the weight of his head because of his weakened state. A place that nobody would know, he pointed out. Where is it? Lennon placed her hands on the cell bars. Do me a favor, Lennon. Erglade forced his eyes to open wide so he could see Lennon's eyes. My son, my only son. Take him with you. He said weakly, his breath was heavy. I promise. Just tell me where your journal is. Lennon held the bars tightly. Don't take him now. Erglade pointed out. Once he's old enough to survive on his own, take him with you. Until then, don't do anything. If he dies, then so be it. If he lives, then take him. He repeated. Lennon could tell that Erglade had begun to hallucinate and that he was no longer responding to her questions. I promise, Lennon nodded as she loosened her grip on the bars. I'll take him when he becomes an adult, she assured. Rasmus knows where my journal is. Erglade muttered. Eris. My love. He muttered. Lennon nodded with understanding and slowly removed her hands from the bars. She took a few steps back, She didn't want to bother Erglade anymore, and she had been in the dungeon for too long. "Rest, my friend," Lennon muttered as she pulled the hood to cover her face. "You deserve to rest." She looked at Erglade for one last time before she left. Rasmus, who listened to Lennon's story, made him remember the day his mother got executed. "Any last word?" An old man, wearing a white robe with gold engravings around it, asked. His eyes were filled with disgust, anger, and somewhat fear. He was one of the members of the Council of Neva. "Yes, I have a few." A white-haired woman, smirking with her dried lips after she fought nonstop for 7 whole days. All her limbs were chained to the ground, including her neck. "Open your ears and watch my mouth carefully." She closed her eyes to gather the remaining energy she had left in her. Everyone stood there in silence, surrounding the city square and staring at the woman with mixed feelings. They despised her because she killed countless lives, and they were also terrified because she killed countless lives with barely any wounds on her body. They were in disbelief because she fought nonstop for 7 whole days, and the scariest part was the fact she killed 3 swordmasters and the strongest knights in central Neva. "On behalf of the lives I have killed, there'll be a reminder to those who have seen a glimpse of my silver hair." The next thing they would see was nothing but redness and a painless death. Aristoria's voice trembled because of the thirst for more blood. Her words made everyone tremble both in fear and anger, even though she was already helpless. "Unfortunately, this is the end," the old man responded as he looked at the man who held Aristoria's greatsword and nodded his head. "I'm not done." Aristoria glanced at the old man with a cold and sharp gaze. The old man sighed as he crossed his arms, staring down at Aristoria. "When you recognize a silver hair, you shall prepare." Aristoria smiled. "The fate that awaits you will be worse than death." She chuckled and began to laugh. The old man and everyone were baffled by her words. It was unnerving. He had had enough and ordered the executioner to kill Aristoria by beheading her head. The sound of the head falling was similar to when Lennon tapped the table in front of her. It made Rasmus snap back to reality and look at Lennon's hand. "I fulfilled my promise and brought you here with me, Count Blackheart. Of course, I didn't expect that you could survive on your own for more than a decade. I brought you in not only because of that but because of your talents," Lennon said, and looked at Rasmus, who had been listening to her story. Rasmus hummed and began to process what he listened to. His father fought for the same reason as what the Sun Crown did 400 years ago. This evil they mentioned and the scent of Videl's kin that Videl found out back then were all connected. "This journal of my late father, he said that I would know where it was?" Rasmus looked at Lennon with his brows furrowed. "That was what he said to me. This journal will reveal everything that he knew and what the Rafinus kingdom hid from the world." Lennon nodded as she looked at the clouds outside the window. "The same thing that happened during the Great Era." Rasmus tried to remember his memories, but it was too hard because of the trauma that the original Rasmus had. So many memories were blurred and unrecognizable. He expected me to remember everything during my childhood when I got traumatized from watching both of my parents die. I might recall it when I go back there, but the land and the mansion now belong to a new family, Rasmus said and began to sigh deeply. "It might take a while, but maybe I'll remember it," he added. "But I have to admit that your personality is a combination of Erglade and your mother, Aristoria, which isn't a good thing at all," Lennon pointed out and crossed his arms. "Your arrogance and intelligence came from Erglade. Your sadistic side and fearlessness came from your mother." Rasmus chuckled softly as he nodded in agreement. "Is that a compliment, great sage?" Lennon shook her head in disbelief as she sighed deeply because no matter how she looked at Rasmus, it always reminded her of Erglade. She knew how cunning and manipulative Erglade was because he knew how to exploit the weaknesses and desires of the people around him. "Shall we change the topic?" Lennon asked. "Have you read that book?" She looked at the red book about magic formation. Rasmus looked at the book and slowly reached out his hand to grab it. "No, I barely read the book, only the beginning. I was too eager to read the history of Orpheus that I put this aside," he answered and shook his head. "The day is still long, and I have the whole day to learn about this, so I might start reading it now." Lennon hummed and nodded with understanding as she stood up from the chair. She looked at the time and realized she had an important matter to do in the magic tower. "Well then, I'll let you have your privacy," Lennon said, then left the library. Rasmus massaged the bridge of his nose, thinking about what he had learned from the book about magic formation. He was right about the magic formation could be used as a magic formula without having him do all the processes before he invoked a magic spell. The problem was he wanted to learn how to make a unique one where only he could use it. "The moon looks a lot bigger from up here, don't you think?" Lennon asked as she walked toward the table. Rasmus looked at the moon through the massive glass window. He didn't realize how bright the moonlight was that the library didn't need any lamp or lantern. How was your study about magic formation? Lennon sat down beside Rasmus's chair. She looked at the piles of books in front of Rasmus with a surprised expression. I understand everything about magic formation and its different purposes. Using it as a spell formula, spell protection, spell limiter, spell enhancer, or as a foundation of magic circles, Rasmus answered as he looked at the dozens of books that were scattered on his table. Lennon thought that Rasmus would be overwhelmed by all the information related to magic formation. She didn't expect him to process everything like it was nothing, it was more like he was underwhelmed and disappointed by it. You have read all of those books, and you're not satisfied with all that? Lennon raised her eyebrows when she looked at the amount of books scattered on the table. I want to learn how to create a magic formation. I want to learn about these runes. Rasmus tapped on the example of a magic formation that was drawn in the book. Lennon knew that Rasmus was planning to create his unique magic formation. She had seen Rasmus's amazing ability to use mana, and he was thinking of using magic formation to make it easier for him to use mana. What you're looking for is this. She lifted her left hand and began to draw visible runes with mana in a circle like a floating and glowing ink and stacked it with another circle in the air. Runes, Rasmus said as he observed how Lennon casually drew a magic circle. A magic circle is a series of magic formations that are stacked with another magic formation. You draw the runes for the first spell formula, then draw the runes to either protect that formula, enhance it, or limit it. You repeat it until you finish all the circles to achieve the spell you want to make. Lennon showed how she stacked all the magic formations until they had 7 layers. Rasmus realized the difference between using mana alone to invoke magic and using magic formation. It was like science and computer science, and he could see why magic formation was the future of magic. Unfortunately, this knowledge. Lennon erased the magic circle she had made by simply waving her hand and dispersing the circle. I don't want to teach you how to use it just like what I had said, she looked at Rasmus. Rasmus could see in Lennon's eyes that she was wary of him and his power. She knew if she gave that knowledge to him, he could endanger someone's life and use that knowledge for no good. That's not a problem, Rasmus stared into Lennon's eyes. I'm glad that you understand, Lennon responded, but she felt anxious about how easy it was for Rasmus to give up on that matter. Why? Lennon asked as she stared into Rasmus's eyes. Rasmus could see the anxiety behind Lennon's eyes where she didn't find any logical explanation as to why he wasn't trying to break the deal. He knew that she knew that he could break the deal because he didn't get the chance to learn runes, and yet he wasn't bothered by it. Maybe because I'm not that greedy like some people out there, Rasmus answered as he looked into Lennon's eyes. Lennon closed her eyes as she took a deep breath, realizing that she had failed to corner Rasmus. She never had trouble seeing people's intentions, but when it came to Rasmus, she was clueless. She still had one last method to change the situation, but it was something that she didn't want to use. Lennon felt that although she gained a great opportunity from making a deal with Rasmus, she was anxious that it was an illusion. She was worried that Rasmus would sell his intelligence that he could trade to certain people to gain knowledge about runes. She knew there were certain people out there who could teach him that, and she was afraid that he could get them easily. The knowledge about runes. Everything belongs to the magic tower, and if you use that knowledge without my permission, I have the authority to take you down and punish you for it. I'm the master of this tower and own everything inside it, Lennon responded with a serious expression, a stern warning in her voice and gaze toward Rasmus. That magic you released back there was impressive, and I hope you didn't think that I wouldn't be able to stop it, Lennon pointed out. If you think you can threaten the magic tower because of the knowledge you have, you're absolutely wrong, she added. Of course, great sage, Rasmus responded and nodded with understanding. We will talk about this whole business in my office at the academy, Instructor Blackheart. Have a good day, Lennon said as she stood up and left. Rasmus watched Lennon leave the library and then Vidal came back, sitting beside him. I'm surprised. Vidal paused as he crossed his arms and watched Lennon leave. She could see through your plan, he stared at Rasmus with his eyebrows raised. I realized by now that she's going to hinder our plan. She's both righteous and powerful. Having her around is not a great idea because she's trying to dig into my intentions, especially when she's interested in my talents. Her suspicion will only grow stronger, and it's better to avoid her, Rasmus explained. Vidal hummed and nodded with understanding. You're not wrong about her. She might be able to make me bleed. Rasmus didn't expect that Vidal would recognize Lennon's power and thought highly of her. They left the tower as soon as they left the library with Novia escorting both of them to the ground floor. Novia didn't say a single word the whole time, making it a bit awkward. Rasmus wondered if she could become his patron, but the thought disappeared when he left the magic tower. They went back to the airfield after receiving a message from Lenin that they could go back to the academy first. She wasn't blinded by ambition and kept her mind thinking rationally, making it enough to prove how cold-headed she was. Once Rasmus arrived at the academy, he was surprised when he saw Lenin was there. He found out that she had the ability to teleport or something similar from one place to another as she pleased. "It appears you made the right decision," Vidal whispered. "She's not an enemy, and I hope it will stay that way," Rasmus responded as he went to the back of the academy. "We need to be cautious around here from now on. Especially around her," he added. Vidal walked into the garden in the middle of the night where the two moons lit up the night sky. He watched Rasmus read a fairy tale book about the heroic paladin named Alsace in the garden. "Do you really need to learn about everything? Just this morning you were busy learning about magic formation, and now you're interested in paladins and templars so suddenly," Vidal asked as he listened to the owls. Rasmus remembered what Monica had said about paladins and templars. He also wanted to prepare himself for the campaign. He wondered how strong beasts were and demonic beasts as well. He then thought about something intriguing about Vidal and his identity as the devil. If you were exposed or stabbed by a sword that was enriched by divine power, would it hurt? Rasmus asked as he kept reading the book. "You're quite knowledgeable, so let me ask you something. What do you know about the devil?" Vidal asked back as he crossed his arms and stood in front of Rasmus. "There are so many stories and interpretations about the devil. Some people believe the devil was a fallen angel, some believe the devil was a powerful being that equals angels, and some believe the devil was an angel that God created to test humankind. There are so many of them still," Rasmus answered as he kept reading. Vidal smirked as he stared down at Rasmus, which gave Rasmus a chill down his spine. Rasmus couldn't help but glance at Vidal, who stared right into his eyes. "But that should be enough to answer your question, isn't it?" Vidal raised his brows. "I was created to be a powerful being without any weaknesses, and only God can kill me," he answered. "That's assuring," Rasmus sighed and continued reading the book. "That's it? Is that your reaction?" Vidal furrowed in disbelief. "What? Do you want me to bow down and worship you?" Rasmus asked back. "Wait." He furrowed as he slowly closed the book. "That's it." He immediately closed his book and stood up from the bench. Vidal looked confused, but he found out what was inside Rasmus's head when he read his thoughts. "You won't be able to find them, those demon worshippers. Unlike on Earth, those Satan worshippers showed themselves to the public as entertainers and people loved them," Vidal pointed out. "It's not that hard, especially that they might look for me." Rasmus shook his head and looked at the sky. "There should be one on this island. It's always the powerful figures," he added. "Good luck finding them," Vidal yawned. "With your help, it would be an easy task. You should be able to sniff them, right? When they have the scent." Rasmus turned around to look at Vidal. "Oh, so now I'm demoted and became your dog?" Vidal arched his brows and stared coldly at Rasmus. "Don't you want to get rid of them?" "Although they're your kin at this moment, we are against everyone," Rasmus answered. "Now that I think about it." "Are you Satan?" Rasmus furrowed. "Satan was the one who sent those humans to hell as they deceived them and made them turn against God. I'm the king of hell. I have never left hell, and the only time I came down there was to take your soul," Vidal answered and fixed his tuxedo to look neat and clean. Rasmus gained more information about Vidal and who he truly was. His curiosity toward the being that made a bet with God and took his soul. "You're not Satan, but aren't you the same? I thought Satan, or whatever the people called them, were the same thing. One being with a purpose to deceive humankind and go against God's teaching." Rasmus narrowed his eyes as he observed Vidal's expression. "We are one, and yet we are many. It's complicated for humans like you to understand, and there's no similarity in anything that I can use as an analogy," Vidal answered as he shook his head. "We share the power, but one of few can monopolize that power. Me, and a few others," he added. There was a moment of silence after Vidal revealed how the demons and him were connected. "I remember the time when you brought me to hell. You mentioned that Satan wanted me so badly because I destroyed mankind, which was Satan's job. Does that mean Earth is no longer exist?" Rasmus asked. That question had been lingering inside his head, but he didn't want to ask that question because he didn't know if he was ready for the answer. Vidal glanced at Rasmus, his gaze cold and sharp under the moonlight. His face was stoic, and yet there was something behind that face that Rasmus couldn't figure out. Was it anger, disappointment, or boredom? "What do you think, Kairos?" Vidal asked, calling Rasmus by his previous life's name. "I don't know," Rasmus answered, his eyes never leaving Vidal's face and his red eyes. "Of course, Earth is gone by now. That world was supposed to last for a few more centuries. You ruined God's plan, and it also pissed Satan because it was their only job, their sole purpose. Videl's voice was deep and cold, his eyes never leaving Rasmus's. God had to destroy that world because of you. Rasmus felt anxious the longer Videl stared at him, as if something was grasping his heart from within. He felt like if he moved a muscle, Videl would devour him and make him disappear. He tried to calm himself down because he knew that Videl wouldn't do something like that, but his mind was playing tricks on him. So, we can assume Satan is here in this world as well, right? God wouldn't erase them just because Earth has disappeared, Rasmus asked, and his throat felt dry when he swallowed. You said that you're one with all the demons but many at the same time. Doesn't that mean you can feel their presence? He added. Videl averted his gaze and turned his head to look at the moon silently. He didn't think that far because he had been busy fooling around and indulging himself in pleasure. He tried to feel the presence of the demons by using the power that they all shared. He suddenly furrowed his brows and looked confused. What is it? Rasmus asked quietly. I couldn't feel any of them. Not even Satan, Videl muttered as he looked down at his hands. No. He looked so confused that his eyes never left his palms. My connection with the other demons is gone. He answered. So you're exiled by God and no longer a demon? Rasmus asked with his brows raised. It appears that's the case. Videl was so shocked that he had to sit down. But my power is still. He paused before he could finish his sentence. No, I'm losing my power as well. I can feel it gradually leaving my body. He clenched his fists and gritted his teeth. Rasmus didn't know what to say or do, he could only watch Videl struggle internally. Videl suddenly looked up and his mouth mumbled something that Rasmus couldn't hear. It looked like Videl was talking with his maker God. So it was your plan from the very beginning. Videl gritted his teeth to the point he broke his teeth and blood began to drip from his gum. You made me powerless to the point I become a mere human. He clenched his fists, glaring at the sky with his red blood-glowing eyes. Rasmus knew that it would be too easy for him to destroy this world with Videl's help. He knew there was something fishy about this bet and what Videl gained from this bet he made with God. He realized that he was in the middle of a situation that he didn't want to be in, but it was already too late to leave. It's getting late, I should get some sleep because I have to teach my class tomorrow, Rasmus said in a soft voice as he looked at Videl. I'll see you tomorrow. Rasmus left Videl alone because he knew that Videl needed some privacy or at least some alone time. He went back to his dorm and went to sleep. The morning came. Rasmus got up from his bed early in the morning and the sun hadn't risen yet. The first thing that came to his mind was Videl's condition because he knew how shocking it might be if he lost his status and power. He wanted to check on him, but he had his priorities straight and Videl was the devil so he could handle himself. As soon as the bell rang, he went to the training ground and found his students running around. Everyone did their warm-up, and surprisingly Monica and Aurelia managed to run 10 laps without a problem. Good morning, instructor. Maximilian looked at Rasmus standing at the entrance. Happy to see me? Rasmus asked as he walked in. If you're that happy, then prepare yourself because it's sparring time. He used wind magic to send a wooden sword flying toward him. Good, because I have been waiting for a rematch, Maximilian said with a serious expression as he grabbed a wooden sword. The others walked to the side and watched the spar between the youngest Northern Star and Rasmus. Maximilian readied his stance and a strong aura surged from within his body. He decided to show a bit more of his abilities for the spar because he wasn't planning to lose again. As expected of the Northern Star. He mastered the art of body forging, Valerie pointed out as he observed Maximilian's surge of energy. Maximilian dashed toward Rasmus. His movements were swift and everyone could barely see each step he took. His body looked so light and followed his command without fail, not to mention every time his wooden sword clashed with Rasmus's, it chipped Rasmus's wooden sword even though it was coated with aura as well. Rasmus tried to block the next attack, but to his surprise, the sword was cut in half cleanly. He noticed something wasn't right about Maximilian's absurd strength. The only answer was that Maximilian's strength and speed were affected by something. That something was the thing that he had been looking for, a way to go beyond a human's limit. A method to exceed the limitation of primal force. Rasmus thought as he dodged the wooden sword that might cut his flesh and bones if he got hit. This is a perfect time to learn about it. Rasmus had to release a powerful aura to match Maximilian's speed and strength. He never thought he got cornered that easily while at the same time, Maximilian kept his distance from him. I admit that I can't win against you if I play fair, Rasmus said as he dodged the sword and then pushed himself away from Maximilian using wind magic. Maximilian furrowed, but then he saw Rasmus's left fingers. The moment he heard the snapping fingers, a fireball appeared right next to him. He immediately created a barrier made of aura as the fireball exploded. Rasmus was surprised that Maximilian didn't have any scratch from his magic. Good, let me see how strong you are, Maximilian Wyverncrest. Rasmus shouted as he bombarded Maximilian with fireballs. Alexander and the others watched how ruthless Rasmus was. They were sitting on the edge with anticipation. Maximilian had nowhere to go, and there was no way for him to escape from the bombardment. They couldn't believe how easy it was for Rasmus to cast those spells rapidly without chanting and magic formation. Rasmus suddenly stopped snapping his fingers. Everyone thought it was over since they couldn't see anything but the thick smoke around Maximilian. Is that all you got? Maximilian asked as the smoke spread out. He swung his sword, provoking Rasmus. Do you think so? Rasmus asked as he raised his left hand. That was just the appetizer. This is the main course. He swung his hand down. Sparks of lightning began to appear inside the smoke. The temperature on the training ground was cold in the morning, while the heat was being produced from the explosion. The collision of both cold and hot with the help of mana created a lightning discharge. You're asking for it. Rasmus clapped his hands, and bolts of lightning struck Maximilian repeatedly. Flashes of lightning blinded Monica and the others, forcing them to block the flashes with their hands. The zapping sound was terrifying because it was deafening. It happened for a mere second, and suddenly it stopped since Rasmus had dispersed the smoke and separated the heat from the cold air. He limited the source of energy, which prevented Maximilian from getting heavily injured from that attack. Not only that, the training ground had its defense mechanism, a magic formation that was buried underground which prevented a powerful spell from killing anyone inside. Rasmus slowly lowered his hand and saw Maximilian still standing. He was in disbelief, but then he saw Maximilian's hands trembling when holding the sword. He knew that Maximilian had reached his limit and would collapse any time soon. You still want some more? Rasmus asked as he lifted his right hand and gathered the energy that he had dispersed. Sparks of lightning were lurking around his palm. That should be enough, instructor. He can no longer fight. Monica stood in front of Maximilian as she stared at Rasmus. He needs to be treated immediately. She looked at Maximilian from over her left shoulder with a stoic expression. Rasmus shook his arms and made the sparks disappear into thin air. He approached Maximilian, who was being treated by Monica. Why did you hold back, Maximilian? Rasmus asked with a serious expression. Are you afraid to hurt your instructor? Maximilian didn't know how to answer that question because Rasmus was right, but he didn't want to be seen as arrogant just because he held back so Rasmus wouldn't get hurt. He was startled when Rasmus suddenly grabbed his collar and pulled him close to his face. Fine, the next time we will have a spar, I'll make you a cripple for life, Rasmus said to Maximilian's face. Rasmus pushed Maximilian away and made him fall on his back. Everyone was shocked because it was the first time they had seen Rasmus being that aggressive, as if he was furious. Everyone was scared of him and didn't even dare to defend Maximilian. On the other hand, Maximilian stayed on the ground, lowering his head. I'm sorry, instructor, I have no excuse. Maximilian said as he held the wooden sword tightly. I won't hold back next time, he added as he slowly lifted his head to look at Rasmus. Good, because we are going to do a campaign soon and I want to see how good all of you are, Rasmus said as he looked at all his students. Everyone was shocked when they heard that Rasmus was planning to send them all to do a campaign except for Monica, since she already knew. A campaign, instructor? Like hunting beasts in the Western Neva? Alexander asked with his hand raised. Yes, that's why I wanted you all to do warm-ups every morning before class started, Rasmus nodded as he crossed his arms. You might think this is too early for all of you, but trust me, you need to do this now because the world won't wait for you, he pointed out as he walked to the middle of the training hall. Everyone furrowed their brows, confused by what Rasmus said because it sounded like he was afraid of something or perhaps had warned them of something that was coming. Now, who will spar with me? Rasmus asked as he grabbed a wooden sword. Rasmus was thinking about primal force and the art that could break that limit and wondered if he could learn it from Maximilian. He needed that to make himself strong because at that moment, he knew that he couldn't even win against Maximilian without using magic. Good morning, instructor, Monica said as she was the first who came to the class. Rasmus looked at Monica, who walked to her seat. He took a moment before he decided to approach her and stood in front of her table. How long have you known Maximilian, Monica? Rasmus asked with his arms crossed. Since I was 5. The Santicus family is close to the Wyverncrest family because we had to defeat the tyrant of the north back then. Although we have known for more than a decade, we barely see each other because we have our own roles in the north, Monica answered as she put her book, ink glass, and quill pen on the table. Rasmus hummed and realized that Monica wouldn't know anything about Maximilian's growth. He had no choice but to ask about primal force to him once he got the chance. Everyone came into class together right after the bell rang. Maximilian looked fine even after he took that much damage during the sparring. His body had undergone countless training, which made his recovery a lot faster than any other human being. Rasmus sat in his chair, still thinking about primal force while his students were staring at him. They were confused as to why he didn't start his lecture even though the bell had stopped ringing. "Aurelia, can you stand over there?" Rasmus asked as he pointed at the floor in front of the chalkboard. Aurelia furrowed, but she didn't ask as she walked toward the chalkboard. She stood there and stared at Rasmus with a confused look. "As you all know, I'm going to send you for a campaign in the West where beasts exist, including demonic beasts. I need to make sure of everyone's safety and if we will be able to hunt beasts without having to worry about demonic beast," Rasmus explained. "But instructor, it's a demonic beast that we are talking about. Even a swordmaster prefers to avoid them if necessary rather than fighting them," Isidore said with his hand raised. "Even the final exam for the senior year, the whole academy has to prepare everything months before the final exam to assure the student's safety," he added. "That might be the case, but Monica said that Aurelia is different from the other saints." "I'm curious what makes her different," Rasmus said as he stood up and leaned his back on his desk. "You have overwhelming divine power, but what makes it special?" He crossed his arms and stared at Aurelia. "I can heal any disease with my power, but that's not the main reason why I'm different." Aurelia answered, but she looked a bit nervous. "Because of my overwhelming divine power, my mother said that it affects the people around me. To put it simply, the divine power within me is dangerous," she added. Rasmus furrowed and didn't understand what Aurelia meant by that. The only explanation or logical reason would be her charisma and charm that made it possible. "Because of that, the world that I'm seeing is not reality. It's more of an illusion of the world that I want it to be, just like a theatrical performance," Aurelia explained even though she looked uncomfortable revealing it. "That's why I have been training to suppress that power my whole life. I could easily remove any doubts, hatred or ill feelings toward me if I wanted to." She looked at everyone in the class. "Show us." Rasmus narrowed his eyes a bit, intrigued by that power. Aurelia was shocked that Rasmus wanted her to show her power even though she had already warned him about it. She had no choice but to show it to him. She closed her eyes as she put her hands on her chest and took a deep breath. She stayed in that position for a few seconds until she exhaled and opened her eyes. "My name is Aurelia Angelus, the future saint." Aurelia said quietly and calmly that it almost sounded like a whisper. Rasmus got chills in his arms and all the way down his spine when he heard Aurelia's voice. It was similar to what he felt when he met Videl for the first time, as if his body was screaming for him to run. Rasmus felt a sense of euphoria when he stared at Aurelia's eyes and heard her angelic voice. He got so allured by her presence, or to be exact to her existence, that his mind went blank. He resisted it by shaking his head to snap him back to reality because he felt disgusted within him for admiring someone. He heard the chairs were being moved, and when he glanced at his students, he saw them all standing up except for Maximilian and Monica. He watched Isidore, Alexander, and Valerie slowly bend their knees. The three of them went down to their knees as they looked at Aurelia like a goddess. He looked at Maximilian and Monica, who weren't affected by Aurelia's charm and charisma. He noticed that Monica held Maximilian's left wrist, making him understand that Monica was preventing Maximilian from falling to Aurelia's power. He also found out that Monica was unaffected by Aurelia's power, and that could be because of her own divine power. Aurelia was disturbed by the fact that Rasmus wasn't affected by her power. She looked at how calm and composed he was even though it shouldn't be possible. How? Does he have amazing faith toward gods? It can't be. Aurelia stared into Rasmus's eyes, confused by what she witnessed. The Blackheart family is wicked. Perhaps he's different? But that's not possible since a bit of desire would be enough to lose his mind in the presence of my power, she furrowed. Is that it? Rasmus asked calmly as he kept his arms crossed after he got the hang of Aurelia's divine power. Don't you have any desire that you want to fulfill? Aurelia slowly walked toward Rasmus. Desire? Is that what it is? Your power makes people weak to their desires. Rasmus narrowed his eyes. Only people who have unwavering faith in gods and those who are pure from any desire can resist her power, Monica answered as she kept holding Maximilian's left wrist. She thinks that you are the latter. I'm not blinded by desires or live only for them. I'm the one who controls my desires, and my desires aren't wishes, but a motivation, Rasmus pointed out as he slowly put his face closer to Aurelia. I am my own master, not gods, not anyone, he added and stared into Aurelia's eyes. For the first time, Aurelia felt weak on her knees. She had never seen a man's face that close to hers, and it made her flustered. She could smell a refreshing and sweet scent from Rasmus's neck, and it made her lose control over her power. The divine power around Aurelia began to release heat that increased drastically. Isidore, Alexander, and Valerie began to lose their minds and lowered their heads to the floor. Monica and Maximilian couldn't resist it either and began to feel dizzy as their minds went blank. I can't control my power. Please stay away from me. Aurelia grabbed her head as she began to feel drowsy. Rasmus had no idea what was going on, but he slowly took a few steps back from Aurelia. He wanted to watch what was going to happen.
Instructor.
The only person who can maintain her power is her mother, but it's impossible to get her here, Monica said as she tried to keep herself conscious. If we didn't stop her, all the students would become fanatics that might endanger their lives.
She added.
Rasmus was deep in thought to find a solution, but before he could come up with one, he felt a gentle breeze passing through him. He was overwhelmed by Aurelia's odor that it put him in euphoria. I can't resist this. Rasmus's head was about to go blank. Just like what Monica pointed out, the whole academy was affected by Aurelia's divine power. Everyone began to walk, staggering toward Rasmus's class. Rasmus pulled out his dagger and stabbed his left hand deeply. He snapped back to reality as his brain focused on the pain. He then grabbed Aurelia and carried her in his arms while the dagger was stuck in his left hand. He ran out of the class and already saw the students and all the staff approaching him like zombies. He saw them pushing each other and even grabbing each other in the face, pulling each other away. He then went back into class, jumped out of the window, and landed safely. His mind was getting fuzzy, especially when he was carrying Aurelia's body. The first thing that came out of his mind to solve this problem was that being.
Videl. Rasmus shouted.
Oh, what we have here. Videl landed right in front of Rasmus and stared at Aurelia, who was unconscious.
Possessed by divinity.
This child reminds me of someone.
He added.
Stop with the blabbering. Can you control her power since you said that divine power is nothing to you? Rasmus asked as he began to feel numb and no longer felt the pain in his hand.
Follow me.
This place is too dangerous, Videl responded as he snatched Aurelia from Rasmus's arms. Aurelia groaned and felt how dry her mouth was, waking her up from her sleep. She slowly opened her eyes and could tell that she had been asleep for a long time. The first thing she saw was a tree right above her with the sound of chirping birds. Where am I? Aurelia slowly turned her head to the left.
A forest. She furrowed.
You must be thirsty, Rasmus looked at Aurelia, who looked confused by her surroundings.
Don't get up.
I'll help you drink, he said as he took a wooden cup from the fire pit. Rasmus gently put his right hand under Aurelia's head and lifted her head slowly. He warned her that the water was a bit hot since he had just boiled it.
Your hand.
Aurelia looked at the piece of shirt that was wrapped in Rasmus' left hand and the fresh bloodstain underneath it. It's the only way to keep me sane. I had to carry you away from people, and that's why we are here right now, Rasmus explained as he gently rested Aurelia's back against the tree. Worry about yourself for now, he pointed out as he walked back to the fire pit. Aurelia closed her eyes again because she still felt a bit drowsy. She listened to Rasmus add wood to the fire, which was quite calming and relaxing because of the crackling sounds. How did you do it? Nobody could contain my divine power except for my mother. Aurelia slightly opened her eyes to look at Rasmus. Everyone has a limit, so I did nothing and let you be until it stopped, Rasmus lied and checked the rabbit meat that he had grilled. And you endured it? Aurelia raised her brows, compelled by Rasmus's amazing control over his mind to resist her power. Rasmus didn't say a word and showed his left hand to Aurelia because it was enough to answer her curiosity.
Are you hungry?
If you do, I leave your share here. Rasmus put in a wooden bowl next to the fire. Aurelia approached the fire pit and looked at the delicious rabbit meat in the bowl. She sat down and took a bite of the meat, shocked by how juicy and tender it was, and especially by how tasty it was. 4 hours ago. Do you know what's happening to her? Videl asked as he rolled up his sleeves. If I open her eyes, you should be able to understand, he pointed out as he sat down next to Aurelia and reached out to her face. Rasmus was slowly losing his mind, but he wanted to see what Videl was trying to do. He leaned his right shoulder against the tree and looked down at Aurelia's eyes. He was disturbed when he saw Aurelia's pupils become narrow like a cat's eyes with a bright golden color after Videl opened her eyes with his fingers. What's happening to her? Rasmus asked as he pressed his left wrist, blocking the blood from going to his hand. His eyes were barely open because of the drowsiness and because of the divine power that lured him to worship Aurelia. You're an erudite, so you must have heard about Nephilim. Videl answered as he closed Aurelia's eyes. Yes, they were mentioned in the book of Genesis. They were half angel and half human. Are you saying she's a Nephilim? Rasmus furrowed as he looked at Videl. No, but she will produce one if we don't prevent her body from getting devoured by an angel, Videl answered as he put his hand on Aurelia's chest. Right now, she's slowly being possessed by an angel because they like her.
How disgusting.
He added and released a black smoke from his fingertips. Rasmus watched as the black smoke wrapped around Aurelia's body and seeped into her pores. He watched Aurelia's body twitching, resisting the unknown power that went into her body. He could see that she was disturbed by it, but she couldn't do anything. You called yourself holy and pure, yet your curiosity is as forceful as mine. What a disgusting and hypocritical being you are. Videl pulled his hand from Aurelia's body, pulling out the black smoke that went inside Aurelia's body forcefully. Aurelia's body got lifted into the air when Videl pulled his hand up. The moment she fell to the ground, her divine power disappeared, and it put Rasmus at ease. But Videl looked in pain after he did all that, especially his hands that were shaking uncontrollably.
It's done.
You can be at ease now, Videl shook his right hand, trying to get rid of the divine power that lingered on his hand like it was something filthy. Rasmus let out a big sigh as he slowly slid down to sit under the tree. He looked at Aurelia's condition and noticed she was sleeping so soundly. He ripped his shirt to be used as a bandage for the wound on his hand.
I haven't asked.
How are you feeling? Rasmus glanced at Videl, who seemed oddly quiet, and he could see Videl's eyes were blank as if he had tons of thoughts in his mind. That was my last string, Videl answered as he sat and massaged his right hand. I never thought I would use my last power to save a life. Ironic, he chuckled in disbelief. I'm sorry, Rasmus looked at Videl with a serious expression. A god's word can mean 1,000 things, a sentence can have millions of meanings. If you try to understand, you'll lose yourself, but believing it blindly, you're as lost as trying to understand it, Videl pointed out as he closed his eyes. Do you understand what I'm trying to say here? He looked over his right shoulder to look at Rasmus. So this bet that you made with God, he played tricks against you? Rasmus asked back as he looked at Videl.
Is this the end?
That everything is just a setup? That makes both of us believe it's possible to ruin this world.
He added.
You're not wrong, but what do you think? Videl sighed as he looked at Rasmus. For the first time, he showed vulnerability to Rasmus. Let's talk about this later, Rasmus said as he lowered his head and looked at the wound on his right hand.
Back to present.
Aurelia was enjoying the rabbit meat, and then she heard the sound of someone stepping on a wooden branch. She looked toward where the sound was coming from, and she was surprised when she saw Lennon. Rasmus glanced at Lennon, surprised that it took her a while to come to see him even though she had been watching him for hours. It seems that you managed to solve the problem that you caused, Instructor Blackheart, Lennon said as she looked at the food and the fire pit. There's no need for an explanation because I have heard everything from your students. She stared into Rasmus's eyes with a serious expression. Rasmus nodded with understanding, while Aurelia looked at both of them with a confused look on her face. You took the first warning when you caused significant damage to the dormitory. Luckily there were no casualties from your action, but this time, you harmed everyone in the academy, more than you imagined, Lennon said calmly with her sharp gaze that looked menacing. The damage you have caused has harmed everyone, more than you can imagine, Instructor. This is your second warning, Instructor. One last warning, and you know the consequence, she reminded Rasmus. Yes, I understand, Chancellor, Rasmus nodded calmly. Lennon nodded back and then walked away since there was nothing else to discuss and knew that Aurelia was in a good hand. What was that all about, Instructor? Aurelia furrowed and looked at Rasmus. You must have heard about it from the trial. I was given 3 chances to prove myself worthy of teaching in the academy. I have used 2, and I only have 1 left, then I will be kicked out if I make another scene, Rasmus explained as he fed the fire with logs. But it was my fault. Aurelia frowned, feeling guilty about her action. You wouldn't scold a knight for bad behavior, you would scold the captain instead. It's my responsibility, so there's nothing else that needs to be discussed, Rasmus looked at Aurelia. Finish your meal, and then we can go back to the academy, he added. Aurelia nodded as she ate the rabbit meat quietly. A day had passed since the massive incident and somehow it got leaked outside the academy. The world heard about the amazing powers that Aurelia had, making people believe that she was a true saint. This matter affected Monica's status as the future saint, making her look like a fake one. The damage you have caused has harmed everyone, more than you can imagine. Videl quoted the words that Lennon said to Rasmus. You have made the worst mistake so far, he looked at Rasmus who was reading the newspaper. Yes, so far, Rasmus put down the newspaper. Vidal raised his eyebrows, shocked that Rasmus agreed to what he said. You admitted that this is the worst mistake? Yes, and I would make more of them in the future. It's not about the mistakes I made, but rather how to deal with the aftermaths. Rasmus stood up and put on his suit. I'm not perfect, and sometimes, just sometimes, mistakes can lead to opportunity, he added as he walked toward the door. Vidal stared at Rasmus for a moment, thinking if they both could turn this world upside down. He had lost his power and he couldn't read Rasmus's thoughts anymore, which made him walk on the edge every time. He then got up and followed Rasmus since he was his butler and he had to act like one.
This arrogant prick again, huh? What an eyesore.
A kid is still a kid, useless with a loud mouth. He should have died with his family. Letting a Blackheart live is a mistake. The hatred and malice were loud and clear that anyone in Rasmus's spot would fall for them. Fortunately, Rasmus ignored them since it didn't affect him at all, not even a change of expression. The students looked at him and antagonized him as if he was the source of the problem. Everyone heard and saw what they wanted to hear and see, not wanting to seek the whole truth. Rasmus went into his class way earlier than before because it was the only place where he could get peace of mind. He didn't expect to see Aurelia in the classroom alone. She was startled when she saw Rasmus coming into the classroom. How long have you been here? Rasmus furrowed. Before the sun rose, Aurelia answered and looked at Rasmus with a troubled expression. Rasmus hummed as he walked toward his desk. He then heard the table moving and saw Aurelia standing up with her eyes locked on him. Instructor, can we have a talk? Aurelia asked as she looked at Rasmus with a frown. She played with her fingers nervously behind her back. Grab your chair if you want to get close, Rasmus said as he sat down and cleaned his desk. Aurelia used wind magic to make the chair float and followed her. She dropped the chair in front of Rasmus's desk and then sat on it, still with her troubled expression. There's something that I have to confess, instructor. My reason to be here isn't just to study, but to increase my influence on the families of the students and the people that live on the island, Aurelia said as she played with her thumbs on her thighs. With what's happening right now, I feel guilty. She added as she looked down, ashamed of what she did. Rasmus already knew that because he saw both Aurelia and Monica try to increase their influence on the students and even the staff. Monica, who was a foreigner, carried a massive burden that she had to beat Aurelia's influence, who was already out of her league. Guilty toward Monica? Rasmus asked and took out his notebook. Yes, mostly, but it's not that simple. Aurelia nodded and stared at Rasmus, who couldn't believe that he understood her. You want a fair fight, but because of this incident, you feel that you gained a lot of advantage, making it feel unfair toward Monica. Is that what you're thinking? Rasmus asked and wrote something in his notebook. Yes. Aurelia slowly nodded, amazed by how insightful Rasmus was. Are you feeling guilty because you're blessed by an immense amount of divine power than Monica? Rasmus asked as he began to write a formula in his notebook. No, Aurelia shook her head. Then why is it that you're feeling guilty because you got an opportunity to increase your influence? Or would you rather waste that opportunity? Rasmus looked at Aurelia, who was staring at his notebook. Life is unfair, the world treats people differently. Those who think fairness exists in all kinds of situations, they're living inside an illusion they made, people that can't accept reality, he added as he closed the notebook. Aurelia took a moment to digest the words that Rasmus had said to her. She felt a little bit better, but that didn't erase the guilt inside her heart. Do you think she's that kind of a person? Rasmus raised his eyebrows. No, Monica is a strong woman, stronger than me in everything else, Aurelia shook her head. She has the right to be upset, but she has no right to blame you or anyone else for what's happening. As you said, she's indeed stronger than you and she has a mature and strong mentality. She's a northern after all. Rasmus put his notebook in his pocket as he looked out the window. Aurelia felt relieved after Rasmus assured her and somehow showed her that it wasn't her fault. She never thought that she could talk with an open heart towards someone that she barely knew. From the first assignment that I gave you and the others, I could see everyone's personality and character. I know that I'm right, including you who have an absurd amount of compassion and kindness, Rasmus pointed out. Right, Aurelia smiled and chuckled. You can go back to your seat. The class is about to start. Rasmus looked at the time on his watch. Aurelia hummed and went back to her desk, feeling relieved after she had poured all her problems to Rasmus. The bell rang and everyone entered the classroom. When Monica entered the class, her expression was colder than usual. She walked straight to her chair and didn't make any eye contact with everyone. Everyone knew why she was acting cold since they were smart enough to understand her situation. Rasmus could see the crack between the students, especially between Monica and Aurelia. It also affected Maximilian indirectly because he represented the North just like Monica. With that being said, the gap became wider again. This might be for the best, Rasmus thought, and let the tension be. A week had passed and the class became awkward because Monica and Maximilian had distanced themselves from the others. Rasmus didn't try to get involved or to fix it, he pretended that he didn't notice it. Monica noticed how close Aurelia had been to Rasmus ever since that incident. She began to think that Rasmus was trying to gain influence by helping Aurelia, but then she erased that thought after knowing that Rasmus wasn't that kind of a person. That's it for today, class dismissed, Rasmus said as he walked out of class. Monica hurriedly left the class and it made everyone look at her, wondering why she left hurriedly. She saw Rasmus walking in the hallway with a notebook in his left hand and writing something in it.
Instructor.
Monica walked beside Rasmus.
Yes.
Rasmus kept his focus on his notebook.
About the campaign.
Have you thought about it?
Monica asked.
Rasmus glanced at Monica, knowing that she was talking around the bush. Do you think you can work as a team?
I don't think so, Rasmus responded.
Even if we are going for a campaign, I'm unsure if the Chancellor will approve it, he added. Monica stopped following Rasmus and she could feel the cold shoulder that he gave her. She questioned why he did that, but the answer that he gave her was enough to make her understand.
You're the smartest student in my class.
The last thing you want to do is distance yourself from everyone. It will only make things harder for you, Rasmus said as he looked at Monica from over his right shoulder. Do not let others' perceptions define you. Even negative recognition is still recognition. Seize that opportunity to your heart's content and maybe turn it around, he smiled and then waved as he kept walking away. Monica stood there, amazed by Rasmus's words and way of thinking. She had never seen anyone who had a pragmatic mind, a realistic view of the world, and yet was opportunistic at the same time. She wondered how he thought and why every word he said sounded so comforting and yet so controversial. A month had passed, and the situation between Aurelia and Monica had gotten worse. It wasn't because of those two, it was because of the students around them who praised Aurelia and mocked Monica behind her back at the same time. Rasmus knew it would get worse the moment the word spread. He knew that both Aurelia and Monica were keen that if the people on the island were acting that way, it would be the same on the rest of Neva. Nobody can stop the train. Rasmus read the newspaper about Aurelia and Monica who were still a hot topic for a whole month. And yet Monica hasn't done anything about it, he sighed in disappointment as he burned the newspaper with a fire that came out of his palms. Rasmus looked at the blue sky, relaxing on the bench in the garden. He was deep in thought about creating a formula to create an antimatter magic bomb using mana, but he still hadn't solved the problem of containing all the elements together. A single miscalculation would be enough to kill him in an instant. Rasmus looked up when he heard the loud noise of propellers in the sky. Rasmus watched the students pointing their fingers at something in the sky. He stood up and he turned around, and that was when he saw a massive all-white blimp with a crest on it. The Angelus crest? Rasmus furrowed. Rasmus looked at Lenin and all the executives hurriedly walked out of the building when they saw the blimp. He could tell that the person inside the blimp was an important figure, and the only person he could think of was Aurelia's mother, the Saint of Neva. Do you want to follow them? Vidal asked as he watched everyone planning to go to the airfield. You must be curious about Astrea, he glanced at Rasmus.
No.
It's none of my business, and I might see her later, Rasmus shook his head. I have a more important matter to think about, he said as he walked away from the crowd and planned to go back to his room. Lenin and all the executives arrived at the airfield and saw the blimp landing. They were anxious because of the sudden visit, and it wouldn't be good news for them. Lenin noticed the carriage that had arrived beside her and it was Angela's carriage. She saw Aurelia walking down the carriage on her own with all her maids. She could see that it wasn't just her that felt anxious, but Aurelia was feeling the same. Lady Aurelia, Lenin said as she lowered her head a bit. She knew that Aurelia wasn't her student at that moment, but a future saint. Chancellor, Aurelia gracefully bowed. Will you excuse me, Chancellor? She bowed once again. Lenin bowed her head and watched Aurelia hurriedly approach the blimp to greet her mother. She then noticed a dot in the sky in the far distance. She narrowed her eyes and was shocked when she saw an all-black blimp coming to the island. One is enough to put us on the edge, and now another one is coming, Lenin said as he warned the other executives about what she saw. Prepare the hall, and make sure it's appropriate for our guests. She looked at Julian and Arnoldi. They both bowed and brought all the executives with them back to the academy to prepare the hall for the Angelus and the Sancticus families. I knew this would happen sooner or later, Lenin sighed as she put her hands on her back. And especially to deal with those, she saw dozens of blimps coming toward the academy from the north. Because of the sight of Angelus and Sancticus blimps in the sky, The journalists informed everyone on the island. They were thrilled to find out what was happening and would die to gain access to the academy. The Templars were the first to disembark from the blimp. Knights with diamond-coated armor that looked dazzling and yet was the strongest material for armor. They wore helmets that hid their identity. The helmets were unique because they fit perfectly with the Templar's head. Aurelia stood there and watched the Templars walk down the stairs, menacingly toward those who had never seen them before. All the Templars unsheathed their long sword and stabbed them on the ground as they went down on their knees. A woman came out of the blimp, her hair, a shimmering cascade of platinum blonde, falling gracefully over her back and shoulders. Styled with elegant, intricate braids, it framed her face in a captivating way. She was dressed in a long white, elegant silk gown that made her graceful and held authority. A white coat hung over her shoulders, and the accessories on her body guaranteed her to be the center of attention all the time. The woman walked down the stairs with her eyes focused on Aurelia, who stood on the carpet with all the Templars on their knees on the sides. When she stood in front of Aurelia, she gently put her right hand on Aurelia's left cheek and tucked her hair in. "How are you, sweetheart?" the woman asked in a gentle and soothing voice. "I'm fine, mother." Aurelia looked at how small and skinny she was compared to her mother. Aurelia was pretty tall for her age, but her mother was taller than the average man. "I heard about what happened, and this issue requires me." Astrea paused to look at the Sancticus family blimp that was approaching. "Both of us, to be exact, to prevent this matter from going further," she continued. Aurelia turned around and noticed the banner on the all-black blimp that was reaching the airfield. She was anxious because Monica's mother had similar powers to her, which might put Astrea in trouble if something happened. "Let's greet Morrigan, sweetheart." Astrea put her hands on Aurelia's shoulders, calming her daughter. "Yes, mother." Aurelia nodded with understanding and began to walk toward the blimp that was about to land. Aurelia and Astrea approached the Sancticus's blimp with all the Angelus's Templars that followed them from behind. Aurelia looked around and she didn't see Monica around the airfield, wondering where she was.
"Your Holiness."
Lennon bowed her head when she joined the group. She had to join them to prevent anything bad from happening between the two powerful families. "Chancellor, it's been a while," Astrea gently smiled at Lennon. "So the rumor is true that living up here is slowing your aging process. You're still as beautiful as back then when I entered the academy," she pointed out. "Your jest, Your Holiness," Lennon chuckled as she shook her head. They watched the blimp touch the ground, putting themselves at a safe distance and respecting the guest. Lennon and Aurelia couldn't stop worrying about what Morrigan was going to do with the situation, since it damaged not only the Sancticus family's reputation but also the North. The first ones who came out of the blimp were the Sancticus family Templars. They were the exact opposite of the Templars from the Angelus family. They wore jet-black armor that was hidden underneath the black fur coat. They wore hoodies and black masks that covered their whole faces to hide their identities. All the Sancticus Templars were on their knees and put their right hands on the swords that they had stabbed on the ground. That was a sign that the saint from the north was about to show herself. The saint of the north came out of the blimp with her long, straight, shiny black hair that cascaded down her shoulders, matching with a black silk gown and a veil that connected to the gown. She wore a tiara on her head, similar to what Monica wore. Her beauty couldn't be compared even to Astrea since Monica was the most beautiful woman of her era. Morrigan looked around and couldn't find her daughter anywhere. She put on her stoic expression that was impossible to tell by anyone unlike Astrea, who showed her expression toward everyone to show and spread her compassion. "Your Holiness," Lennon bowed her head to welcome Morrigan. "Chancellor, you're as bright as the last time I met you," Morrigan said as she stared Lennon in the eyes. "It's always calming to have you around, Chancellor. It reminds me of the good times as your student here in the academy," she pointed out. "My power is to serve as justice and to uphold righteousness. It's my mission as the descendant of the great sage," Lennon answered. Morrigan nodded in agreement, and then she looked at Astrea as the Sancticus Templars stood behind her. She glanced at Aurelia and slightly raised her eyebrows. She began to approach Astrea and Aurelia. "Please know that no offense is intended. You must be proud to have a bright and beautiful daughter, Astrea," Morrigan said as she kept staring at Aurelia. "I have become old, so I know that I'm no longer beautiful." "Of course, she's my precious," Astrea smiled as she gently stroked Aurelia's hair.
"May I?"
Morrigan looked at Astrea. Astrea allowed Morrigan to approach Aurelia. "Your Holiness," Aurelia bowed gracefully. Morrigan put her right hand on Aurelia's head and gently stroked her hair with a smile on her face.
"You'll be a great saint, child."
"The world will put a heavy burden on you," Morrigan said calmly. Aurelia had no idea what Morrigan meant by that, whether it was a compliment or a warning. "Your Holinesses, I have prepared a fitting place to rest and talk comfortably. Please follow me," Lennon said as she noticed the journalists had entered the airfield. Lead the way, Chancellor, Astrea said with a soft and soothing voice, a gentle smile painted on her face. Rasmus stood in front of the door to his room and noticed that Monica was in his room. They stared at each other and one of them was staring at the other anxiously. Are you avoiding your mother? Rasmus asked. Yes. I don't know if you understand, but northern women are raised like fighters where they get rid of their feelings and emotions. She's here not to see me but rather to deal with the issue, so that's why I'm here, Monica answered. Your mother was like that too, right? She raised her brows. I barely knew her, but yes. Rasmus nodded with understanding and reminisced of the memory of Rasmus's moment when he met his mother. Say hi to your mother, Erglade coldly stared at Rasmus. Rasmus stared at the darkness in the cell he was in when his father told him to greet his mother. Slowly but surely something emerged from the darkness, a tall and thin pale woman wearing a white dress that revealed her shoulders and collarbones. She looked beautiful with her white braided hair and bright blue eyes with a silver circlet on her head. It's a shame that you have the same hair color as mine, the woman said as she looked down at Rasmus. You have to carry the sins of your mother, she added and coldly stared at Rasmus. Rasmus ignored the words that the woman said to him because he was enchanted by her beauty. It was the first time he had ever met his mother. The woman noticed that Rasmus was admiring her, and she couldn't help but let out a gentle smile at him. She slowly leaned down and went down to her knees so they were at the same height. She gently stroked Rasmus's hair and stared him in the eyes for a whole minute. Rasmus, my son. The woman put her hands on Rasmus's cheeks to make him snap back to reality. Your father and I, we love you so much, she stared at Rasmus's eyes back and forth. But our love will make you suffer, more than you can imagine. We want you to know that this is for the best, not for me or your father, but for you, she cupped Rasmus's cheeks a bit more tightly. Rasmus was too young to understand the words that his mother said, but her affection toward him was comforting. It made him believe that his mother loved him and was happy to see him. Aristoria, it's time, Erglade said. The woman kissed Rasmus on the forehead and held it for a few seconds before she let him go. The woman stood up and went back into the darkness grabbing something. Rasmus was in awe when he saw her mother emerge from the darkness with silver swords in her hands. He watched her mother walk past him in her black armor that covered her body and a cape that fluttered gracefully as she walked, but then he noticed that his father and mother had walked out of the cell. When he was about to follow them, Erglade closed the cell right in front of his face.
Father? Mother?
Rasmus began to panic when he realized he was locked in the cell. Get some rest, Rasmus. We will pick you up when we are done, Erglade said as he walked away. Mother. Rasmus looked at his mother who sheathed her swords and put them on her back. Aristoria didn't bother to look back at Rasmus and kept walking, going further from him. Rasmus felt uncomfortable when he reminisced about that part of the memory of Rasmus' childhood. He never knew a mother's love because Kairos was an orphan and he had always been alone with no love. A mother is still a mother. Go and find your mother because she's here not for the issue, but for you, Rasmus looked at Monica. To put it bluntly, I don't want to put myself too deep into the problem that I have caused, he pointed out. I never thought you could be selfish as well, instructor. Monica stood up. It's not about being selfish, it's about not putting myself in an unnecessary problem. Rasmus leaned against the wall next to the door. No need to worry. I'll do my part to fix the problem when I'm summoned to meet your mother and Aurelia's mother, he assured. Be careful around my mother, instructor. She can see through lies, Monica warned as she walked past Rasmus. She can't be bought by your words. She looked at Rasmus and then left. Rasmus was intrigued by what Monica had said about her mother, but it was already too late to ask because she had left. See through lies? I have been dealing with that annoying devil with that ability of his, Rasmus muttered as he chuckled. In the academy hall. The hall had become a banquet hall where a table was set in the middle with food and drink for Astrea and Morrigan. Everyone worked so hard to turn the hall befitting for the saints. There are too many journalists outside the gate. Lennon rubbed her nose bridge because of the headache from dealing with the journalists. I have brought a few of them this time, your holinesses, she added and pointed at the 4 journalists that entered the hall with her. Astrea looked at the journalists for a moment to look at their appearances from top to bottom. How about these ladies and gentlemen? Astrea looked at Morrigan. Yes, they're good enough, Morrigan nodded. Astrea and Morrigan agreed to allow a few journalists to record the conversation. They wanted ones that were neutral to avoid biased perspectives and to avoid them from manipulating the record. Before they could begin the discussion, Monica entered the hall. Morrigan stared at her for a moment with her stoic expression. Please have a seat. Lennon pulled up the chair next to Morrigan as she looked at Monica. Monica sat beside Morrigan gracefully and stayed quiet with her eyes closed. The discussion about the issue was opened by Lenin. She explained what had happened back then, but she kept Aurelia's power secret because it was something that nobody should know, or at least it shouldn't be her to reveal it. The discussion went on an hour, and most of the time, it was Astrea who spoke about the issue. She emphasized that both future saints weren't about who had more power or devotion, but rather about sacrificing oneself for the people. She wanted the world to know that saints were chosen not by humans but rather by the gods they believed in. Astrea warned those who believed that Monica was a fake saint or had spread it. She stated that if those people could mock Monica as the future saint, those people could mock Aurelia in the future as well. She warned everyone that disrespecting one religion was equal to disrespecting the other religion. Astrea wished that the world should coexist whether people believed in different religions. She quoted that peace wasn't given but rather achieved and that it was everyone's job to maintain it, not destroy it. The journalists were moved by Astrea's words because it opened their eyes and they no longer looked at the issue from one side. They understood how dangerous it would be if the world kept the issue going. The words that came out from those people who ignited the issue would become a weapon that would harm them in the future because it would cause a big war between the North and the rest of the world. They understood that their mission was to calm the people of Neva before it was too late. They could feel the burden in their hands, shoulders, and ears because they were the ones who could prevent war or start a war. The moment someone uses a religion as a tool, that's when they have lost their faith and humanity, Astrea frowned. Astrea's last words were engraved inside the journalists' heads. It was the final words that closed the discussion and cleared the issue. All the journalists left after they got everything and wanted to publish it as soon as possible. Now that the journalists are gone, can you tell me how exactly someone who's not your mother can handle your power? Astrea narrowed her eyes as she looked at Aurelia. Not only he could handle it, but he could also stop your power, she added. I have notified him to come after the journalists leave, Your Holiness, Lenin said. He should be here any time soon, she assured. As soon as Lenin said that, Rasmus entered the hall, and everyone looked at him with curiosity. On the other hand, he looked at Astrea and Morrigan's appearances. Perfect timing, Instructor Blackheart. Please have a seat, Lenin pointed at the seat across her chair. The atmosphere in the hall grew tense as Rasmus walked in, the air heavy with the weight of the unspoken questions lingering in the minds of those present. Astrea's narrowed eyes tracked his movements, and Morrigan, though composed, observed him intently, assessing the man who had managed to do something so extraordinary. Rasmus, with his usual calm demeanor, approached the seat Lenin pointed out, taking it without hesitation. His eyes met Astrea's briefly, then Morrigan's, before he settled into the chair. Despite the intensity of the situation, he remained unfazed. Thank you, Chancellor, Rasmus said politely. The last Blackheart in the world. Astrea paused to hum and looked at Rasmus thoroughly. I'm not surprised you could handle her power, but it's not a good thing. She narrowed her eyes. Rasmus kept his body straight and expression unfazed even though he had no idea what Astrea was talking about. He wondered if it was because of his mother's bloodline, an orthias which made Astrea believe his ability to resist divine power was from his mother's bloodline. My apologies, Your Holiness, but I don't understand what you mean, Rasmus said calmly. This should be sufficient to explain how I managed to keep myself sane. He unwrapped the bandage on his left hand and showed the big wound that hadn't dried and fully healed yet. Lenin, Aurelia, and Monica were shocked that the wound hadn't healed even though it had been a month. After they saw how bad it was, they understood why it hadn't healed yet since it looked terrible, and they were confused as to why he didn't ask to be healed. I believe Saint Morrigan can help you with this problem. Astrea looked at Morrigan. When Morrigan stood up, Rasmus could see how anxious Monica was by how she twitched her brows. He remembered the words she said about her mother. Can you show me your hand? Morrigan stared at Rasmus with her stoic expression. Rasmus didn't hesitate to offer his hand to Morrigan because he wanted to know the greatest saint of the century. He read books about her that she could heal any wounds and she could bring a king back to life when she was Monica's age. You will feel an unbearable itch, endure it, Morrigan warned as she put her left hand under Rasmus's left hand. Morrigan put her right hand on Rasmus's left palm and gently brushed her fingers on the wound. She stared at the wound and the flesh began to regenerate slowly. She looked at Rasmus's reaction, but she didn't get anything from him, not even a flinch. Rasmus felt the unbearable itch in his palm like a feather tickled him from inside his palm. It was uncomfortable, but he could endure it because he tricked his mind by distracting it. He then thought about if he could use the future saints as his pawns. You have very dangerous thoughts in there. Morrigan stared right into Rasmus's eyes, shrouding by a thick blackness. She pointed out. Rasmus was surprised that Morrigan could tell what he was thinking. He wondered if she could read his thoughts or if it was something else. The fact that she said that she saw a thick blankness, He believed that she could only see the color of people's thoughts. It's just a mere thought, Rasmus responded as he stared back into Morrigan's eyes. Everyone has the freedom to think whatever they want to think. You can judge someone's actions, but not their thoughts, he added. Rasmus's words echoed throughout the hall because everyone was quietly observing and judging every move he made and the words he said. Lennon and Astria stared at Rasmus and they both made serious expressions because his words were controversial. You don't expect me to have pure and happy thoughts after what I have been through for the past decade, do you? Rasmus asked as he raised his brows. You can read my thoughts as you please, but know your boundaries, he warned with a serious expression. My apologies, Morrigan nodded with understanding. I'll focus on healing your wound, she said as she looked at the wound that was about to heal completely. After Morrigan healed Rasmus's wound, she settled down in her seat. Rasmus was amazed by how effective and powerful her healing power was. He wondered if that power came from God or if it had something to do with mana. You saved my daughter, Count Rasmus Blackheart, more than you think, Astria said as she gently stroked Aurelia's hair. Is there anything that you want? And I mean it when I said everything, she added. Thank you, Your Holiness, but am I allowed to request for it later? Right now I have nothing in mind. I'm still taking small steps ever since I got my life back. Rasmus's eyes were empty and he stared at the table.
Of course.
If you need anything, you can tell my daughter, Astria smiled as she nodded with understanding. The atmosphere became awkward again since there was nothing else to discuss. Rasmus wasn't bothered by the atmosphere because he used it to see each individual who was at the table. He saw how Astria loved her daughter so much while Morrigan rarely opened her mouth or showed affection toward Monica. Since I have the opportunity to speak with the parents of my students, I think it would be a waste if we don't use this opportunity to speak our minds at each other. Rasmus looked at Morrigan and Astria. Astria and Morrigan shared a look, and then they both looked at Rasmus as they nodded in agreement. But before that, I think there's someone who shouldn't be here since this matter is only between the parents and the teacher. Rasmus looked at Lennon with a smirk on his face. Lennon didn't expect that Rasmus was trying to kick her out of the hall. This never happened before, being kicked out in my own academy. Lennon scoffed as she stood up and shook her head in disbelief. But, as a chancellor, I shouldn't get involved in this matter as you said. I'll deal with the journalists outside, she added and left the hall. Rasmus observed both parents once more, but Morrigan still hadn't shown any reaction or spoken toward Monica. He wondered if Morrigan was upset or if she was cold in general, untying herself from any lingering emotions.
So, Instructor Blackheart, what do you teach your students?
As a former student here, I have to admit that I barely remember anything because the academy couldn't provide me something that I needed back then, Astria said as she tried to remember her days back when she was a student, and it was 30 years ago. I'm not sure about Lady Morrigan because she came to the academy 4 years later. Astria looked at Morrigan. Unfortunately, I felt the same, Morrigan responded as she nodded. In that case, allow me to show your holinesses what your daughter is learning in the academy, or at least in my class. Rasmus put his right hand in his suit. I'm going to show you the result of the first assignment that I gave them. He pulled out 2 papers that got folded. Monica and Aurelia looked at the papers and began to panic. They didn't expect Rasmus would show their first work to their mothers because they were naive when they first wrote the assignment.
Instructor.
Aurelia stared at Rasmus and was a bit upset and flustered. Rasmus handed the assignments to Astria and Morrigan so they could read what their daughters wrote. He couldn't hide his joy at seeing his students panicking. Astria and Morrigan grabbed the paper and read it thoroughly. They noticed what the assignment was and they both had to admit that it was a great assignment. They could see how their daughter planned on gaining recognition and what they were going to use it for. Astria couldn't hide her smile because she could see how innocent Aurelia was in the writings that she made. On the other hand, Morrigan didn't react to Monica's writings at all. Those came from their hearts, and as you can see, those things that they wrote were something they believed in. Rasmus pointed to the papers in Astria and Morrigan's hands.
Were.
Morrigan glanced at Rasmus with a cold gaze, her brows furrowed. Based on Morrigan's reaction, Rasmus could assume that Morrigan found Monica's writings to be as perfect as they were. He began to understand Morrigan's personality, detached toward everything. He could see how bland the world was in Morrigan's eyes, and that the only purpose in her life was to devote herself to her God that blessed her with amazing power. These are the perfected versions after attending my class for a few months now. Rasmus pulled out the papers and offered them to Astria and Astria. Astria looked at Aurelia's latest writings and she was surprised at how mature she looked in there. Although she didn't agree with everything that she wrote, overall, she was impressed by how she could think that way to gain recognition.
What's this?
Morrigan put down the paper as she stared at Rasmus. What are you feeding Monica with? The first one is a lot better than this, She narrowed her eyes and she looked dissatisfied and a bit upset from the way she asked. Monica lowered her head and she already knew that her mother would disapprove of her writings. She felt embarrassed because she could feel Astria's and Aurelia's gazes toward her and her mother. The atmosphere became heavier in an instant because of what Morrigan said. Everyone didn't know what to say, or did they have the right to say anything in the first place?
Care to explain, instructor?
Morrigan asked as she put her left hand on the paper on the table. Although I don't have any expectations from this academy, I don't expect someone to dare to manipulate Monica's mindset. You're trying to brainwash her to your heart's content, she added and gave a cold gaze at Rasmus. Aurelia was about to say something, but Rasmus raised his right hand at her. She watched Rasmus shake his head, signaling to her to not get involved. That's a bit extreme to call it brainwashing, Your Holiness. Isn't it a teacher's job to feed the students valuable and useful information and facts? Is it called brainwashing if the students begin to see the world differently? Rasmus asked and stared at Morrigan. My position and status don't matter here in the academy or in my class. On my first day, my students look me dead in the eye, Rasmus sighed as he fixed his sitting. I'm not superior to my students. I put myself as a contender for their conscience, he explained. We argued all the time and I respect their views on things, but I hate to admit that their views were the views of what they taught them to see. In this case, all of them saw the world that their parents forced them to see, Rasmus pointed out with a serious expression. Now tell me, Your Holiness. Am I the one who manipulates Monica's mind, or is it someone that's close to her? Rasmus raised his brows and stared into Morrigan's eyes, as if that someone he mentioned was the person he was staring at. Monica looked at Rasmus with a shocked expression and wanted to say that he had gone too far. She glanced at her mother, but to her surprise, Morrigan was calm and collected even after the words that Rasmus had said to her. With all due respect, Your Holiness. I might have crossed the line, but if a child has to follow what their parents taught them, shouldn't I be somewhere out there to follow my parents' legacy? Killing people and seeking revenge. Rasmus asked calmly after he managed to nail it safely. Morrigan closed her eyes and could understand why Rasmus tried to change Monica's mindset, but she still didn't like that idea. Your parents were evil, and God bless you for not following their footsteps. But that's a different case because I'm nothing like your parents, Morrigan answered. My teaching is suited for her as the future saint of the North. You don't know anything about our culture and society. What you taught her is nothing but speculation of norms and morality, she explained and looked at Rasmus. I don't mean to be disrespectful, Your Holiness, but you got an easy life. God blessed you with a power capable of bringing someone back to life, healing any kind of wounds, and cleansing any disease. You don't have to do anything because the world is moving around you. Unfortunately, Monica isn't as blessed as you are. If she has to follow your steps, she won't survive, and the ones who would be disappointed were no others than you two, Rasmus said with a serious expression and faced his body toward Morrigan. At that moment, Morrigan was struck by Rasmus's words and it made her open her eyes. She began to feel the guilt that was slowly crawling out of her chest. She realized that all this time, she tried to shape Monica just like how she had shaped herself. I'm not trying to teach Your Holiness about God, but you missed the most important thing, Rasmus furrowed his brows, disturbed by the fact Morrigan couldn't see it. You detached yourself from everyone and everything because you chose your God who chose you and gifted you a miraculous power. But Monica is also a gift from your God, to you, Your Holiness.
Treasure her, he pointed out.
Morrigan looked at Monica, who looked anxious the whole time. She knew that her daughter was anxious and feeling guilty for what had happened, but she ignored it. She realized she had neglected her daughter, and yet she had high expectations from her daughter. A saint is still a human, and humans make mistakes. Because humans make mistakes, they deserve a second chance, and nothing is too late, Rasmus said as he stood up. I'll take my leave and give Your Holiness some privacy, he added and excused himself. Astrea stood up from her seat and held Aurelia's hand. She signaled to her daughter to leave the hall so Morrigan could have time alone with her daughter. They both decided to leave the hall and followed Rasmus. Morrigan was left alone with Monica in the hall. She slowly turned toward Monica and reached out her right hand. She never thought putting her hand on her daughter would be heavier than living as a saint her whole life. She gathered all her courage and put her hand on Monica's head, stroking her daughter's hair slowly. I have apologized to countless people like breathing air, and yet it's so hard to say it to you. Morrigan frowned a bit, anxious and feeling infuriated by her own incapability.
I'm sorry, Monica.
I have been neglecting you my whole life and there's no excuse for it and it's all my fault, she said as she reached out to Monica and gave her a hug. Monica never experienced the warmth of her mother's body. She had never been this close physically to her mother. She didn't know what to react to for a moment because it was too shocking for her. She then wrapped her arms around her mother and embraced it wholeheartedly. There's no need to apologize, mother. I know how hard it is because I have seen you up close. As a future saint, I understand and I will have the same responsibility, Monica said as she kept hugging her mother.
No, you're not, Monica.
I realize it by now, Morrigan said softly as she gently pushed Monica away from her. Your life is yours, and I want you to explore while you still have time. Let me deal with the North and its people as their saint while you can enjoy your youth, she gently smiled at Monica. I still have at least a decade as a saint, so you can use your time to your fullest. Monica was in disbelief that Rasmus's words could move the cold heart of her mother, which nobody could do. She didn't know if she should be grateful or scared by Rasmus's ability to convey someone's heart with mere words.
Yes, mother.
I'll use my precious time to learn and become someone that you can be proud of in the future, Monica smiled happily at her mother. They both felt the same tingling feeling inside their chests, something that released the weight off of them. It was the feeling of connection between mother and daughter that had been long forgotten by them. But, Rasmus Blackheart is dangerous, Morrigan said as she put her hands on Monica's cheeks, cupping them gently. Although the words he said moved me and opened my eyes, the absolute darkness still lingered around him. His thoughts are dangerous, she pointed out and tried to warn Monica.
I know, mother.
Sometimes his words and wisdom are admirable, but sometimes they're questionable, Monica nodded with understanding. Every word he said, it didn't come from his heart, he said things that he could benefit from the situation, she added. You observed him well, Morrigan nodded in agreement.
Be careful around him, Monica.
He might have an ulterior motive, especially when his students are from the most powerful families in Neva. Perhaps he wants to gain our favor in some way, she warned. I'm not sure about that, mother, Monica furrowed as she shook her head in disagreement. Morrigan tilted her head with a confused look because of what Monica said. I thought about it the moment I joined his class, but it was as he said earlier that he's acting not as a teacher but rather a contender. He's not trying to be likable to us, and he's distancing himself from us by creating a wall between his students. He does have an ulterior motive, but Maximilian and I have no idea what it is, Monica explained the reason behind her disagreement.
I see.
He's a tough egg to crack, Morrigan hummed, and it reminded her of Erglade, Rasmus's father, because Rasmus resembled his father. Please be cautious around him, and warn the others, she looked at Monica as she caressed Monica's cheek. Yes, mother, Monica nodded with understanding. Rasmus noticed that saints from both families had decided to leave the hall with their Templars. He watched the commotion made by the students since it would be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to meet both saints at the same time. What are you thinking? Vidal leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, staring at Rasmus. About what I'm going to do now, Rasmus paused, his eyes never leaving the saints. I think it's time for me to leave this place and start my plan. He muttered and watched the students swarm the saints. So you're not going to stay here and work as an instructor? No more wasting time. Vidal raised his brows. I'm getting bored here anyway.
This place is too nice.
I need brothels, women selling their bodies, and drunkards who would kill for a penny, he added as he looked at the saints. I have planted enough seeds into their minds. I have gained their recognition, and I believe Morrigan and Astrea are wary of me now after that meeting. It's pointless to teach them from here and out, Rasmus answered as he leaned back against the backrest of his chair. Vidal stared at Rasmus and was curious about what Rasmus was planning to do. He was surprised that Rasmus had planned everything as if he had all the answers for all kinds of situations. Vidal found out the reason why Rasmus helped solve the problem between Monica and Morrigan. He understood Rasmus's plan as showing those powerful families that he had no desire for power from them. He saw Rasmus's plan to disappear and to be looked over by those families, making them neither an ally nor an enemy. I know you're having a hard time right now. All I'm asking you is to not create problems for me from now on. Rasmus glanced at Vidal from over his right shoulder.
Don't worry.
I'm not planning to do that in the first place. I'll let you handle everything, Vidal nodded with understanding, thinking about his existence that had been demoted by God from the devil to a normal butler. I'm planning to start over and disappear. This whole thing is a beneficial mistake, but a mistake nonetheless. Rasmus stood up and grabbed a piece of paper. We need allies, or to be exact pawns who share the same interests as mine, he added and began to write in the paper. You're planning to resign and leave? Vidal raised his brows as he read the resignation letter that Rasmus was writing. From the academy, but not from Gratlin. I still haven't received my money and teaching from Lenin. I got a deal from her, remember? Rasmus raised his brows and walked back to his desk. I have nothing to gain here, and to be honest, this is a waste of time, he added. I'll follow you, Count. Vidal smirked as he looked out the window. The sun was setting and the academy became quiet as usual. Thanks to the sudden visit of the saints, there were no classes that day. It's time for me to meet Lenin, Rasmus said as he folded the letter that he wrote. Rasmus left the dormitory and went to the main building since Lenin should be in her office. When he was about to enter the building, he noticed the immense amount of mana on the training ground. He was familiar with it, so he went to check if he was right. Training on your own? Rasmus stared at Maximilian on the training ground.
Instructor.
Maximilian grabbed his towel and wiped off the sweat on his face. Do you want to spa with me? I promise I won't hold back this time, he added with a smirk on his face. I don't gain anything from it, so I'm not interested, Rasmus answered as he crossed his arms. Unless you want to bet the method to break the limit of my primal force and teach me how to do it, he raised his brows. Unfortunately, I can't give away this art to anyone, instructor. Maximilian shook his head and didn't hesitate to give an answer. I thought so too. Well then, continue your training, Rasmus said and left the training ground. Maximilian furrowed and thought about that short conversation which felt off to him. He noticed that Rasmus was being straightforward for the first time, and it bothered him. He shook his head and then continued his training. Rasmus stood in front of Lenin's office, and before he could knock on the door, Lenin's voice told him to enter. He opened the door and saw Lenin indulging herself in paperwork on her desk. Is there anything you need, Instructor Blackheart? Lenin asked and kept her focus on the paper in front of her. Lenin was waiting for an answer, but she only heard footsteps going close to her desk. She was about to look at Rasmus, but stopped when she saw Rasmus pushing a letter on the desk toward her. This is my resignation letter, Chancellor, Rasmus said as he took a few steps back after he gave the letter. Lenin was shocked and looked at Rasmus with a confused look with her head tilted a bit. She wouldn't expect him to resign from teaching at the academy, since she knew that he could handle the pressure. Why? I don't think you have any issues here, and I know for sure that you can thrive here because you're strong and unbreakable, Lenin asked as she opened the letter, keeping eye contact with Rasmus. Just because I can, doesn't mean I want to do it, Chancellor, Rasmus answered calmly as he put his hands behind his back. I don't want to spend years in this place where people are elbowing each other to climb the ladder of fame, power, and wealth. People here are savages, he added. Lenin was confused because she remembered when she invited him to teach at the academy. It was still vivid inside her head when he confronted the executives during his interview and managed to shut them down. She thought he was trying to climb the ladder, but it turned out that he was looking for something else. If you quit, you have no purpose here on the island. You're going to be sent back to where you came from. Are you sure about this? Lenin raised her brows as she put the letter in her drawer. I believe you still owe me both money and knowledge, Chancellor. I assume, with your power, I can live in the magic tower until you fulfill your promise, Rasmus answered with a smile on his face. Right. Lenin paused as she thought about the deal. I can arrange that. When are you going to leave? She crossed her arms at the desk as she stared at Rasmus. Tomorrow, early in the morning if it's possible, Rasmus looked at his wristwatch. I'll take care of it once I'm done with my work, Lenin nodded with understanding. Thank you, Great Sage. Rasmus no longer called Lenin Chancellor and addressed her status as Great Sage in the Magic Tower. Rasmus excused himself and let Lenin do her work. Lenin on the other hand looked at the resignation letter in her hand, confused by Rasmus's decision. I don't understand what's inside that man at all. Lenin sighed as she massaged her nose bridge. Why is your son so similar to you, Erglade? She muttered to herself. The morning came and all the students were walking to their classes, including Monica and the others. They entered the class and were surprised that Rasmus wasn't in the class since he was always the one who came into the class first. The bell rang, and there was no sign of Rasmus anywhere, not even in the hallway. Good morning, students. A woman entered the classroom and walked toward the desk. Maximilian, Monica, Aurelia, Alexander, Valerie, and Isidore looked at the woman with confused looks on their faces. They didn't know who that woman was because they had been taught by Rasmus alone. Where's Instructor Rasmus? Maximilian asked the woman. You haven't heard? He resigned and he left the academy this morning. The woman looked at the students and had no idea they didn't know that Rasmus had resigned from the academy. What? Why? Monica furrowed and was in disbelief. What else? He has nothing to offer and he can't even teach, the woman scoffed. All of them stared at the woman dead in the eye like beasts staring at an animal that had entered their territory. The woman's smile disappeared when she noticed that the students were giving cold gazes at her. We'll see if you have something to offer to us, Instructor, Monica responded coldly. The instructor realized that she had already made the wrong move, and she regretted what she had just said. Rasmus entered the City of Knowledge, which was exclusive to scholars and mages. He couldn't wait to read the books in the library again because he didn't get the opportunity to learn a lot of things. Count Blackheart, you're here already, Novia said as she walked toward Rasmus. I'm sent here by my mentor, and she said that I should treat you as an important guest. Please, come with me, she added and pointed at the famous tower that pierced through the clouds. Rasmus entered the magic tower and Novia led him and Videl to the 120th floor. The room that they were going to stay in had a perfect view of the whole island. You can use this ring. It has a magic formation to allow you to access the facilities that we have, but not everything. You can eat on the 125th floor and there's an artificial lake on the 130th floor, and lastly the library. All you have to do is press the gem on the ring when you're in the magic circle over there and point the ring on the floor you want to go, Novia explained. If you need anything, I'll be in my research lab on the 90th floor. Have a good day, JL said and left hurriedly. Rasmus put his bag on his bed and looked out the window.
So?
What's the plan now? Videl asked as he lay down on his bed. You can do your thing. I'll focus on my training, Rasmus answered as he looked at the amazing view of the whole island. Rasmus was left alone because Videl went hunting for men and women who piqued his interest. He was indulging himself with the books that were in front of him. This world looks so beautiful from the outside, but as rotten as earth in my previous life. Why do you have to ruin everything that you created? Rasmus mumbled as he looked at the moonlight.
Is it boredom?
Or are you dissatisfied with your creations? Rasmus was deep in thought when suddenly someone knocked on his door. He tried to sense the mana behind the door, but he didn't feel anything. He knew who it was, so he went to the door and opened it. How's your stay? Do you like the room? Lennon looked at the room and realized Videl wasn't in the room with Rasmus. It's a shame that I can't enjoy it long enough, Rasmus answered as he walked to the table. You're not going to let me in? Lennon raised her brows. It's your tower, I don't think you need anyone's permission, Rasmus answered. But please come in, he said as he pointed at the chair across from him. Lennon walked in and closed the door behind her. She sat at the table and suddenly books fell from thin air onto the table. These are the books that you need to study. They're all important for you to understand advanced magic formation and magic circles. Some of the books have examples of magic formation that you can use, Lennon explained as she pointed at the books on the table. Rasmus immediately grabbed one of the books and checked the content of it. He skimmed through the pages and knew that it would teach him a lot of things and would solve the problems he was having. Your former students are saddened when they found out you resigned. They all came to me personally and asked the reason for your departure, Lennon said as she stared at Rasmus checking the content of each book. You created a lot more problems than the things you have done in the past months, she sighed. They'll manage. There's no need to be worried about it, Rasmus answered coldly as if he didn't care about them. Thankfully, it's not my problem anymore, he added. Lennon should have realized that Rasmus never had an attachment to his students in the first place. He treated them so greatly that she misinterpreted it as affection. Once again, she didn't understand how his mind worked, and what it was that he was looking for. Are you feeling dissatisfied working in the academy? Lennon asked and was still curious about his resignation. A man tries to climb the highest tree because he believes it's a great achievement. Not everyone agrees with him because climbing the highest mountain, swimming in the fierce sea, or diving into the deep sea is a better achievement. Not everyone has the same view of greatness. It's as simple as that, Rasmus answered. And which one are you? Lennon rested her cheek on her right palm. Neither. Achievement is meant to boast an ego, and I don't want to waste my time boasting my ego, Rasmus answered without hesitation. I just do what I want to do. It doesn't matter if I'm better or worse than others, he added and began to focus on the book in his hand. Lennon had never seen anyone like Rasmus in her whole life. She wondered if Rasmus saw things blandly or if it was because he had a specific goal in life. The more she dug into Rasmus's way of thinking, the less she understood. Something told her that he had no drive or motivation, but on the other hand, she believed there was more to it. Is it true that you only saw your late mother once in your whole life? Lennon asked, changing the topic. The only time I met my late mother was when my late father introduced her right before the rebellion. I don't know anything about her, but her love for me was real, Rasmus answered as he leaned back and read the book more comfortably. Count, what do you think of the evil that your late father mentioned? Do you have any idea? Lennon asked as she stacked her arms on the table, leaning her body forward as she stared at Rasmus. If demonic beasts exist, then so are demons. What else could it be, great sage? Rasmus asked back. I believe you know more than everyone else, right? But you know it's not enough because those people hid it so well so the whole world wouldn't know. If you want to seek the truth, You're going to put yourself in danger. Seeing your personality, I don't believe you would go that far for a truth, Lennon said with a subtle warning in her voice. But what do I know? Your actions always surprise me, she added. It's not me that you should worry about, but rather the people of Neva, Rasmus pointed out as he flipped the page. I can feel like something big is going to happen. 2 saints coming to the academy just because of what happened to Aurelia and Monica was an understatement. They must have another reason to meet each other, hiding the truth from the world, he added. What are you implying? Lennon asked, and she felt uncomfortable with the words that Rasmus said as if he knew something that she didn't. Anything that's built based on lies or hiding the truth would only make it break and fall even harder. I'm afraid what they're trying to hide, it would only ignite the distrust of the people, Rasmus explained. A spark of flame can burn a whole forest. Lennon could no longer hide her uneasiness, the feeling of fear crawling up her shoulders. She was baffled that Rasmus could say something like that like it was nothing. If you have to choose which side are you on, which one would it be? The one who built the lies or the one that seek the truth? As someone as important as you are, you should have thought something like this before, right? Rasmus asked as he copied the magic formation to his notebook. I don't believe choosing a side would make things better. As someone who holds power like me, my job is to prevent things from getting worse and solve the problem immediately, Lennon answered because that was what she would do. I see, Rasmus responded. Lennon felt like she had just made the wrong answer because of Rasmus's response. She never thought she could be judged by a young man who was 40 years younger than her. It's getting late. You must have things to do, so I won't take your time anymore, Rasmus said, and never even once he lifted his head from the book in front of him. Lennon looked at the time on Rasmus's wristwatch and it was late as he said. You should get some rest as well. This time you can stay here for as long as you want, so enjoy your time here, Lennon said as she stood up. As I said earlier, it's a shame that I can't enjoy it long enough. I'm not planning to stay here for too long, Rasmus responded and kept writing in his notebook while reading the book beside it. Lennon chuckled and nodded with understanding. Once you're done reading all the books, I'll test your knowledge and understanding about magic formation and magic circle, Lennon said as she walked toward the door. Rasmus didn't say a word even after Lennon left and closed the door. A few days had passed since Rasmus received the books from Lennon. He hadn't left his room since that day and kept studying until he grasped all the knowledge from the book. Where did she say she's at? Rasmus mumbled as he grabbed the ring that Novia had given him. Was it 90th floor? He looked at the ring as he walked to the corner of the room where the magic circle was engraved on the ground and ceiling. Rasmus was curious about the ring and the magic circle because he wanted to know how they worked. Press the gem on the ring. Rasmus paused to press the emerald on the ring. Then wait until the magic circle activated. He watched the magic circles glowing underneath and above him. A blue light surrounded Rasmus and it made him feel like inside a tube. He looked at the runes in each circle and had no idea what kind of spell each circle produced. He then saw words and numbers floating in front of him. He used the ring to point out which floor he wanted to go to, and once he was done, he was teleported to the floor he wanted to be on in an instant. This is hard to process, Rasmus scoffed in amazement. Rasmus looked at the 90th floor's plan and noticed it was massive and that he could get lost if he didn't know where to go. Rasmus asked the archmages who walked around the 90th floor about the location of the research lab. At first, they glared at him with disgust until they saw the ring on his left index finger. They treated him like an important guest and guided him to the research lab where Novia was. He entered the research lab, not knowing what it was used for because in his head, it would be researching microorganisms or something like that. He didn't expect the research that Novia was doing to have something to do with gems where the whole room was filled with colorful gems. You look tired, Novia noticed when Rasmus entered the lab.
Have you eaten?
She asked with a stoic expression as she observed the gem in her hand. I ate the fruits in the room. I just haven't slept, Rasmus answered and looked at the rare and finest gems around him. What are you researching here? He asked and grabbed a dark blue color gem that was as big as his hand. The quality and durability of rare gems for magic tools, Novia answered as she put down the gem. Just like the ring you're wearing, it's a magic tool as a medium to make it easier for people who can use mana to use magic, she explained and pointed at the ring on Rasmus's finger. So you engraved magic circles in these gems? Rasmus glanced at Novia who was focused on checking the quality of the gems in front of her.
Yes.
It seems you have read about magic tools. Novia looked at Rasmus with her brows raised. Do you know the types of magic tools? She asked and continued to focus on the gem in her hands. Improvement, expansion, alteration and protection. Rasmus put the gem down carefully. Rasmus explained each type in detail where improvement magic tools were meant to enhance and boost magic power. Expansion magic tools were meant to hold more power as an external space that the body couldn't handle. Alteration magic tools were meant to use mana from the surroundings rather than from the body, which prevented the body from exhaustion. Lastly, protection magic tools were used to create protection for the wearer. Not only did he explain the purpose of each magic tool, but he also explained how it worked. He explained it simply, and yet he didn't miss anything in his explanation. You learned, Novia looked at Rasmus, impressed by his knowledge. So you really have been studying, and that's why you're in that state. She realized why Rasmus had bags under his eyes. It was the first time she showed her smile. I don't like wasting time, Rasmus responded as he kept exploring the lab. Novia could see in Rasmus's eyes that he was thirsty for knowledge that reminded her of herself back when she was a child. Do you want to test those out? Novia pointed at the magic tools on a table away from the rest. Rasmus looked at the table and saw gloves, cloaks, and different types of jewelry. He went there and looked at them from up close, then grabbed the white glove from the table. Where are the gems? Rasmus looked at the glove inside out. It's mixed with the fibers to make the glove. If you pour mana on the glove, you will see the magic formation, Novia explained as she walked toward Rasmus.
Try it.
Don't be shy, she smiled at Rasmus's curiosity. Rasmus put on the glove and poured his mana into the glove. It was as Novia said, the engraving did appear in a glowing blue light. The runes that were engraved on the glove were nothing like those in the book, which made him confused. They're runes that have been modified to serve a specific purpose. You can say that one letter of the modified rune is equal to a single or multiple words, unlike normal runes that represent letters, Novia explained as she pointed at the runes on the glove. Rasmus understood that immediately because it was similar to the languages in Asian countries, like Chinese, Korean, and Japanese. He didn't expect that runes could work like that, and that it would give endless possibilities. What does this glove do? Rasmus observed the unique engravings on the glove. Break this, Novia pointed at the gem that she was holding. How? Rasmus furrowed with a confused look. Imagine your hand is crushing this gem. You can do it, Novia answered as she lifted the gem high in the air. Rasmus pointed his right hand at the gem and crushed the air with his fingers as if he was crushing an apple in his hand. He was shocked when the gem that Novia held shattered into pieces and fell on her head. I wasn't expecting that to happen. Novia brushed off the debris on her head. I forgot that you have mastered controlling mana. You used that magic tool to its maximum capability, she added as she gathered the debris on the floor. Rasmus looked at the glove for a moment and then looked at the red gem on the table. He imagined himself picking up the gem, and it made the gem float and move as he moved his hand around. He realized the magic tool gave him the telekinesis ability, and it was amazing.
Tell me.
What's the reason it's forbidden to learn about runes? Rasmus removed the glove since he didn't want to play with an expensive item. Every nation has its own secret techniques, knowledge, or traditions. Nobody has the right to learn them until you're worthy to earn them, Novia answered as she stared at Rasmus. You lent us your knowledge, and we paid the price for it. So we earned it, as simple as that, she smiled at Rasmus. That's fair, and I don't mind about it either because I have more in here. Rasmus pulled out his notebook and showed it to Novia. Your mentor is so interested in the content of this note of mine that she would trade it with her research. So, I still have a lot of knowledge that I can use to get what I want, he added, his brows raised as he looked at Novia. Novia looked at the notebook for a moment and then looked at Rasmus. She wondered what made Lenin interested in that notebook and how she would trade her personal research for it. She knew Lenin well enough that Lenin's research was worth more than anything in Neva. If my mentor is interested in that, I suggest you keep it for yourself. I might look young, but I was raised in a place where power means anything. Some individuals would offer you things that you want and need for that book, then they will use it for things you can't imagine, Novia warned with a serious expression. I'm not planning on selling this in the first place. When I said I can use it to get what I want, it's about using this knowledge to get what I want, Rasmus responded as he put the notebook in his suit's pocket. I don't care much about wealth and I already got my gold mine from the deal I made with your mentor, he added. Novia was confused by Rasmus's words because it sounded like he hadn't mastered the knowledge in his notebook. It made her curious about the content of that notebook and why Rasmus sounded so confident in his statement. Anyway, I haven't asked you the reason why you came here. Do you need anything? Novia asked as she put the shattered gem on the table. I want to test the magic formation and circle that I have created. I don't know anyone else in this tower, so you're my only choice, Rasmus answered. I see. My mentor also said that I should accompany you when you want to test your magic. You managed to make my mentor bedridden, so it would be wise for someone to keep an eye on you to avoid unnecessary casualties. Novia nodded with understanding.
Perfect.
I can wait until you're finished, so I'll let you be, Rasmus said as he walked toward the door.
We can go now. Shall we?
Novia asked with her brows raised. Ladies first, Rasmus walked to the side and pointed at the door with a smile.
Let's see.
Rasmus looked at his variation of magic formations and became one big magic circle. It should be like this. He imagined the magic circle in his mind and pointed his hand forward. Since Novia was at the arcane stage, she could see the mana flow, and she looked at the magic circle that Rasmus had made. She looked at it with curiosity because she had never seen that kind of magic circle before. She wondered what it did and what kind of magic it would produce. A bolt of lightning came out of Rasmus's index finger and it traveled in a straight path. Countless lightning bolts followed the same path in a matter of a second, which was extremely deadly to whoever got hit by it. How did you do that? Novia was shocked by what she saw.
Which one?
Rasmus was curious about what Novia meant because so many things happened almost simultaneously. Your lightning bolts were centered and moved forward rather than going down like normal lightning bolts, Novia answered with a confused look because she had never seen that before. We summon lightning bolts from above because the only way it moves is down, and nowhere else, she explained. Yes, that's how it should be, but I manipulated its path and went wherever I wanted it to be, Rasmus responded as he crossed his arms. I can simply point my index finger anywhere and lightning bolts will go in that direction as far as I want them to be, he pointed out.
How?
Novia tilted her head as she walked closer to Rasmus. Rasmus ripped the page of the magic circle he had drawn in his notebook and gave it to Novia. Do you see how it works? Rasmus asked as he looked at Novia, who was busy deciphering the magic formations. Novia deciphered the magic circle with a few formations inside. She looked at the first ring where the formation was about creating heat and the ring acted as an enhancement for the spell. She then looked at the second ring where the formation was the opposite of the first one, creating cold air, and the ring acted as an enhancement as well. Why did he waste the first two rings for these spells when the lightning bolt spell itself already has that? Novia furrowed and looked confused at the magic circle. No matter how I looked at it, it doesn't make any sense. She looked troubled. You made this magic circle unnecessarily complicated, Jill answered after she was done deciphering the magic circle.
Is it?
Why don't you try to use it? Rasmus raised his brows and pointed at the paper in Jill's hand. Novia stared at the paper and imagined the magic circle in her head. She created an exact copy of the magic circle and then she released it. When the lightning bolts came out, she was surprised that they struck where she pointed her finger. This doesn't make any sense, and I'm confused about how it works so precisely. Novia was baffled when she kept shooting lightning bolts in any direction she pointed. If you're questioning that, then why don't you answer this question? Rasmus crossed his arms and stared at Novia. Why is it when you blow the lit candle, you extinguish the flame, but when you blow on embers, it starts a fire? He asked with his brows raised. Novia took her time to find an answer to that question. She had never thought about that and realized it was a really good question. Both conditions were affected by air, and she wondered why the first and the second had different results.
I don't know.
Novia felt ashamed and looked troubled when she didn't know the answer to the question. The answer is because of the interaction and reaction. As long as you understand how nature works, you will achieve the result you desire. Isn't the magic formation's purpose to use our creativity to make our own unique magic? With that being said, this is the result that I desired, Rasmus explained. For Novia, who was one of the smartest people of her generation, she still didn't know much about science. Science wasn't important in this world because it got overshadowed by magic and people were more interested in magic than science. She didn't understand that the hot air and the cold air that Rasmus produced in the magic circle were acting as a channel for lightning to move freely. He used that trick to create static electricity which ionized the air and made lightning use that channel as its designated path. Not only did it create a path, but it also made it easier to release more lightning bolts without wasting a lot of mana because of it. Where did you learn about this? Your knowledge is superior to the scholars that we have here in the city, Novia asked and was surprised by Rasmus's knowledge. Don't believe everything you see and hear. Question every small thing and you'll find answers that will lead you to greater mysteries that people often ignore and look over. Don't be scared to feel lost because if you keep looking, life will always find its way, Rasmus answered with a bit of a smile on his face. But how? This isn't something you can understand on your own. Novia walked even closer to Rasmus and was eager to understand how he could achieve such knowledge. Nobody taught you how to crawl, roll, stand, and walk when you were a baby. A human body is made by a series of complexities, but it's not impossible to understand if you wish to understand it, Rasmus answered and could see the thirst for knowledge in Novia's eyes. And so does nature. It's not really that impossible to understand, you just have to pay attention to your surroundings, he added. Novia was convinced that Rasmus was someone who could be called the genius of the century. She had never met anyone with that kind of insight and creativity like Rasmus. Count Rasmus, would you like to join my research? Novia asked the first thing that came out of her mind. She believed that having Rasmus by her side, she could reveal the mysteries of the world. Unfortunately, I have to decline, Rasmus shook his head. I'm not planning to stay here for long, and we have a different path to take, he answered and explained the reason behind his rejection. I see, Novia nodded with understanding, a bit disappointed by the rejection. Rasmus could see the disappointment in Novia's eyes, and he knew that it would be a great opportunity for him, but he didn't have time to take a detour. He was running out of time because he had to make his own empire. He could feel it in his guts that an unknown force might take over Neva soon. He had to start his journey to find people of his kind who shared the same vision. We are still young. Why with the rush? Rasmus raised his brows. There'll be a time when we will meet each other again. When the time comes, we can share what we found, he smiled as he put his notebook in his pocket. You're right, Novia nodded as she stared at Rasmus. Also, I should thank you for allowing me to see the world through your perspective. You have opened my eyes, and it makes me realize that I'm not special, she added, and she looked a bit embarrassed. 4-leaf clovers are still counted as special even though there are a lot of them out there. Don't lower yourself, and what you have achieved is the proof of your hard work. You can be proud of yourself, but don't let it blind you, Rasmus responded as he gently smiled at Novia. Since Rasmus got the chance to test the magic circle that he had made, he didn't have a reason to stay on the testing ground. He had grasped the idea of magic formation and magic circles, so he could begin his experiment with the time he had left in the tower. You're leaving already? But you just tested a single spell? Don't you want to learn about advanced spells? Novia furrowed when she saw Rasmus walking to the door. Now I know how to walk. I'll take my time enjoying the walk, Rasmus answered as he waved his left hand, telling Novia that he wasn't interested in advanced spells. As I said, we are still young, so enjoy the moment once in a while, he added. What about this? Novia pointed to the paper in her other hand. Don't you want to take it back? She furrowed. I guess it's yours now. Let's just say that it's a payment for letting me play with your toy earlier. Rasmus waved his hand as he left the room and yawned because he needed to get some sleep. Novia blinked her eyes a few times, shocked by how easy it was for Rasmus to give his unique spell to her.